The boy was known by a dark, terrifying title, Child of the Devil. Because of this reputation, even the caretakers in the orphanage and the holy men of the church turned away, and when their gazes met his, they visibly recoiled or hid with contempt. They feared the energy within him. It was not the sacred power that gods grant to humanity, but a dark might that usually occurs only in demonic lineage. Despite the stigma, Kiwi Alaya had a rare and focused mastery of this magical power. His gaze sharpened as he began to pour dark energy into the wounded creature. He silently watched with satisfaction as the light faded. The restorative spell from page 320 of his textbook he successfully adapted to his own unique mana, proving that even the power of evil can heal curses. Sitting alone in the forest, he analyzed the effectiveness of his technique. Realizing that if he could master the speed and reproducibility of these spells, his research would become truly valuable. The young researcher's eyes flared with a new burning passion to gather enough wealth to buy all the books he could want, a simple desire that, unknowingly, would set him on the path to becoming a legend. While he dreamed of books, the world beyond the forest grew cold. Whispers about the neighboring demonic kingdom and the looming threat of war began to echo through the streets of a nearby town. He poured himself a drink as news spread in the air about the escalating conflict between the human kingdom and the demon kingdom, signaling that the decade of relative peace had come to an end. While reading the article, his thoughts darted between the terrible situation of the Western Elven Kingdom and the military connections of the wife of an old patient. While nearby in a cage, a small round creature chirped impatiently. The quiet morning was abruptly interrupted by the appearance of a stern military officer, Lieutenant Colonel Yakov Shuizin, who demanded to know if he was truly the dark healer called Kivalya. The officer informed him that in these times of war, every citizen must fulfill their duty to the kingdom, especially since he was already under heavy suspicion of heresy. Surveying the specialized monster hospital with an expression of disgust, the lieutenant colonel utters his merciless attitude. He does not believe that such an institution can operate in such a prestigious district and doubts whether the doctor has any affinity for such creatures at all. He explains the lack of competition in this niche attracts many monsters to its doors, so the officer asks if his motivation in this work is purely financial. He denies it, saying that as a person born with magical power, he is doomed to become an outcast regardless of how he chooses. So only one thing remains, to use his unique abilities to survive. During a room search, the officer comes across a find that brings a predatory smile to his face, and the young healer noticeably flinches as his secrets are revealed. He directs his gloved index finger at the trembling, multi-horned creature on the table, and his voice is cold as he confirms his suspicions. Having seen that he is holding such a monstrosity, he declares, "The boy is now officially recognized as a heretic." Because of this sudden accusation, the young healer freezes, begins to stammer, and insists that he has never heard of a law forbidding the treatment of monsters. The officer only snorts contemptuously, explaining, "The decree was issued just this morning and has not even reached the newspapers yet." From this revelation, Don is overwhelmed by a dark realization. As the weight of the situation settles, he begins to piece together the truth about the sudden military draft and the forced closure of his clinic. It is now clear, these are not coincidences but parts of a larger and more sinister plan. He is like a puppet, every move dictated by an invisible hand, and most likely it reaches from the highest echelons of the kingdom's leadership. Realizing that the lieutenant colonel has no right to act so unrestrainedly on his own, he understands. He is trapped in someone else's scenario, he cannot strike back at those who hold the strings. Under this pressure, his face shifts sharply from fear to a sharp, predatory smile, and he waves it off as if the situation has no weight. Calmly states that this is just his usual professional business, and his eyes flare with a new, dangerous focus. Again shifting his gaze to the wounded creature, he notes, of the 3 gunshot wounds, 2 passed through, and 1 is still lodged near the bone or in the area of internal organs. He carefully calculates the consequences, and all his attention narrows to one goal: to save a life that can still be saved. With a soft, conscious chuckle, he adjusts his glasses and confirms that he fully understands the reality of his own trouble. Fear disappears, he is replaced by a cold, clinical verdict. In a moment he becomes a storm of furious energy as if in metaphorical chains of his service and urges the creature, endure just a little longer. His mind is like a map of anatomy and blood vessels, fully immersed in the bloody yet necessary work of the dark healer. He works with clinical precision. His hands move inside the monster's insides with unnatural ease, finding the tumor formation in the stomach. Instantly he suppresses the creature's immune response and simultaneously triggers rapid cellular regeneration to patch the damage. Having accomplished the impossible, he retreats and quietly urges the creature to flee. The little monster struggles and rolls across the floor, while Lieutenant Colonel stands frozen stunned, unable to comprehend how a creature on the brink of death fully recovered in mere minutes. While the officer watches the sample disappear into the shadow, he again fixes a stern gaze on the boy as if to ask whether he truly understands how serious his actions are. He reminds him, One must not joke with the plans of the kingdom, and every step must follow the established script. The unshaken young healer calls himself by his shameful nickname, insisting that saving lives is just his job. Then he boldly demands a payment of 2 million money, calling it a necessary contribution for the emergency surgery caused by the military's own negligence. This insolence is met with a sharp slap. The boy is thrown back. He stumbles unsteadily. The officer roars with rage. He is disgusted that the heretic dared to speak about monetary compensation after such an open display of disobedience. He sprawled on the floor among scattered medical supplies. The boy finally understands his mistake. He thought his utility would protect him from physical harm, but the cold truth of his extremely dangerous situation is now painfully obvious. The officer looms over him. Leaning over him, the officer explains. As a recognized heretic, the boy has lost all rights and now exists only at the mercy of the crown. He reveals a new plan. The healer will be sent to a specific city to treat high-ranking demon prisoners under strict military supervision as a tool for the intelligence department. A dark, sadistic smile spreads across the officer's face as he looms very close. He explains the true cost of the boy's gift. With a healer available who can patch up wounds, they can subject prisoners to much more painful and prolonged interrogations without the risk of them dying before revealing their secrets. He looms over the boy, grabbing him by the collar with one glove and offering a choice that actually changes nothing. Serve the interests of humanity or accept execution as a traitor. The boy stares blankly in response, sweat pouring down his forehead as he finally realizes the people before him are far more terrible than any demon he has ever faced. The officer loosens his grip as the boy finally surrenders. His voice is quiet and despairing as he agrees to surrender at the heights of military intelligence. After this, the lieutenant colonel approvingly notes his pragmatism and reminds him. He is an outcast with no other refuge and no chance to earn a living again in this kingdom. Later, the young healer sits alone. The new reality presses on him like a heavy, tangible burden. He bitterly reflects on the cruelty of his fate. He is forced to use his gifts to ease torture, not allowed back into his own clinic even after the war ends, and stripped of his identity as a dark healer. Because of this betrayal, a spark of resistance begins to smolder within him. He clutches his head in despair, reproaching himself for the years of research he invested in his work, yet he was still treated like garbage. In a sharp, manic surge of determination, he decides, if the kingdom has no place for him, he will simply cast the kingdom aside. He begins to weigh the options and realizes, leaving home is no small matter, but he must find a faction that will truly value his unique abilities. A plan forms in his mind. If he cannot thrive here, he will join the very enemies the military wants him to break. His thoughts focus on the Devil's Kingdom Oberon, which is now in a bitter war with its own country. He thinks, if he manages to help free their prisoners and establish contact, it will be the perfect chance to sell his services to the other side. From this realization, his despair turns into feverish, greedy joy. He imagines as if his new demon patrons are showering him with gold. In the empty room, he declares, if this kingdom does not give him profit, he will simply move his business to the demons and find his wealth there. Kaichikam already ahead of him nearby, he is escorted through the cold stone streets of Belzin, a town on the northern border, under the watchful eyes of armed guards. When they approach the transport, the soldier sharply orders him not to waste a step and does not suspect that the heretic in their custody is already preparing to escape to the enemy. A grizzled, stocky, bald officer with exaggerated energy salutes and greets Lieutenant Colonel Schwitzenbach on his long journey to the royal capital. Turning back to the front line, the lieutenant colonel wastes no time and interrogates Second Lieutenant Gorgon whether their valuable prisoner finally broke down during the interrogation. The officer hesitates. His eyebrows glisten with sweat as he admits that their attempts were in vain and yielded no results. This failure provokes a sharp, piercing look from his superior. In the depths of the wet stone casemates, some huge demon remains stubborn. Its mighty body is shackled by heavy chains, yet its spirit has not broken despite the apparent cost of this imprisonment. To resolve this deadlock, S.H. Wiesen pushes forward a young healer, presenting him as the solution to their interrogation problems and forcing the junior officer to look at him with flattering admiration. He strictly warns about the dark power of the dark heel boy. He says that even the fully enchanted chains of the church may not hold the restored demon until the end, and severely limits any contact to less than 60 seconds. Then the commander shifts his gaze to the guards around and orders them to maintain double security both for the captured monsters and for the newly arrived healer. Finally, he grabs the boy's face in a distorting, deadly grip, and his voice drops to an icy whisper. He promises a swift death if the demon dies or if the healer attempts any form of betrayal or escape. He stands motionless while the young healer treats the terrible ultimatum. Kiwi, his face crossed by fear and new determination, confirms that he understood the task. He realizes, the military want the demon to remain alive for interrogation, but he himself is already forming a different plan. If the creature survives, they can escape this prison together. This realization settles deep in the boy's head with cold clarity. and a wave of understanding washes over him as he finally accepts the full weight of his role in this dangerous game. Nearby, the stout second Lieutenant Gorgon assures his superior that he will keep a watchful eye on everything, promising, under his supervision, the prisoner will have no freedom. The officer nods with current confirmation before retreating, so immediate surveillance remains with his subordinate. After the commander disappears, Gorgon sharply changes his manner, activating aggressive authority, pressing the barrel of his pistol against the boy's head. He growls, ordering the Dark Healer to immediately begin restoring the demon's right arm and each time injects a warning. No betrayal. Kiwi, with sweat pouring down his forehead like hail, silently submits to the threat. He slowly approaches the gigantic shackled creature, the air heavy with the smell of blood and damp stone. He extends trembling hands. The boy touches the demon's maimed limb, already ready to channel the dark forces needed for this work. In captivity, the demon barely moves, a broken giant with horns and scars almost does not flinch as the treatment begins. Through clenched teeth and a haze of torment, he intermittently utters one desperate plea. Sweet release by death. In response, the boy's gaze hardens, an unwavering spirit flickers within it, contradicting his small stature. It is a force that does not retreat. A quiet challenge burns in his eyes as he looks at his creature in pain. He ignores the guard's furious screams and the cold steel pressing against his temple and speaks directly to the prisoner. Calmly explains that he does not intend to kill. His purpose as a dark healer is to mend what is broken. Gorgon, enraged by this conversation, growls for the boy to be silent and listen to only one word. He f. He finished the work exactly as the deadline approached. His hands were still covered in a dark residue after the healing process. Gorgon watched him closely and informed the boy that a separate room had been prepared for him under strict condition. He was not to leave it for any reason except to perform his assigned duties. The officer's face twisted into a cruel, sweaty grimace as he brandished a sharp instrument before him and announced a cold ultimatum. He warned, if the boy was even suspected of attempting to escape, he would face the same ruthless cruelty as the prisoners he was ordered to house. Soon the boy found himself alone in the center of a cramped, dusty cell. Although the room was clearly for prisoners, without any comfort, he realized. Having his own space away from prying eyes was even an ideal development for his hidden plans. As he stood in this silence, he recalled, the real reason he lingered so long near the demon prisoner was not only for healing. It was during the prolonged physical contact that he was able to map precisely the intricate biological and magical structure of this creature's body. It was hidden diagnostics. He passed his own mana through the entire demon system to extract secrets. Every moment of delay was a calculated step toward a successful, perfect escape, and only in his thoughts did he apologize to the prisoner, asking the creature to endure the pain and imprisonment a little longer for the sake of their future freedom. A sharp, predatory gleam in his eyes and magic crackling around his hands was about to launch his plan. He decided to create a dark heal of such power and specialization that it would become the best catalyst for their uprising, turning everything against his taskmasters at the moment they least expected it. On the night of the second day of his service as an assistant during interrogations, the boy curls up in his roomhi's body, feeling as if filled with lead. In vain exhaustion, he mumbles complaints about the exhausting schedule. They chased him relentlessly from dawn until long after the sun had set. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he contemplates the small victory he nevertheless snatched despite exhaustion. He found just enough clearance to discreetly leave a secret message for one of the prisoners. A message is a set of precise instructions. If the recipient understood the plan, during the next treatment session, they need to bend their index finger 3 times. He checks the invisibility spell and watches as the light flickers, dims, and fades. He is satisfied. The place where he will hide his work is perfect. He imagines the layout of the establishment in his head. There are generally 3 demons kept here, one high-ranking official in the East Wing and another demon assigned to the West Wing. He counts the military presence, estimating from 30 to 50 soldiers. Since this information is a state secret, he cannot risk writing it down, so he burns every detail into his memory. He recalls the mighty demon he treated for the first time, and is convinced that if that captive had been at full strength, he probably could have suppressed the entire facility on his own. He focuses on the image of the demon's huge wings. Releasing it first is the main priority. With those wings, the demon will be able to carry him across the border to the demon kingdom, bypassing any foreign eyes. Now his plan is clear. First, he must establish his reputation as a dark healer, and secondly, successfully convey this escape plan to the demon leadership. He prepared for the next phase of his plan, sharply rolled up his sleeves and bared a predatory smile. The time had come to start a covert correspondence with other prisoners, beginning the next day. By the 3rd day of imprisonment, the boy maintains a mask of cheerful submission, enduring verbal insults from the guards. Gagan Svetlaka looms over him and pressures him so that the so-called dark healer deals with his troubles faster. He bursts into a scream because there are supposedly no changes. Holding the guard's leg, he meticulously casts magic, knowing exactly. This display of submission is a necessary step toward his escape. Every move is calculated to arouse no suspicion from his captors. A sudden sharp shout from behind tears him from concentration, and he flashes for a moment with his true, ruthlessly tense nature, sharply throwing his head back. The guard's keen inquisitive gaze forces him to quickly suppress hostility and don the obedient guise again. You breathe out with relief. His brief lapse went unnoticed. He continues working while Gorgon still grumbles. The guard impatiently demands to speed up the healing process to avoid wasting time on a break, but the boy calmly explains. Dark healing cannot be rushed without consequences. He gives a detailed clinical explanation of the risks, possible infections, and organ failure if natural healing is bypassed. Annoyed by these technical details, the guard growls, "Come on faster." He does not suspect that the boy is secretly checking whether the captive demon has already caught his hidden signals. On the fourth day, he walks through the prison corridor. Compose stops in front of a specific cell, inquires about its occupant's condition, and speaks evenly and professionally. In the shadow of the chamber, a hand, torn with scars and sewn with threads, twitches thinly and deliberately with its fingers. The signal is received. The first thread of the escape plan has already been pulled. He successfully established contact. His female interlocutor noticeably felt it and shuddered with emotion. She is amazed at how quickly everything happened on the very first day, in her gaze both surprise and genuine admiration. Having gained this impulse, she outlines the conditions of their possible agreement. She demands the release of all imprisoned demons, even herself. To show agreement, the same gesture must be performed. Refusal is indicated by bending the thumb 5 times in a row. This underground correspondence becomes a daily ritual. Every time the young healer bows before the giant prisoner, the silent language of fingers continues to speak. The next day, the reply returns as expected. 3 deliberate bends of the index finger and the oath is still in motion. Despite progress, the female demoness remains wary. She focuses on the innate limits of their connection and realizes short, one-sided signals are a poor substitute for detailed plans. The risk of deadly misunderstanding weighs heavily on her mind. Her determination hardens as soon as she changes strategy. She understands. In this cold environment, trust is a luxury they cannot yet afford, so she will have to show what she is capable of, confirm her value that cannot be discarded or ignored. A whole week passes under this new schedule. Second Lieutenant Gorgon Svetlaka creeps through the stone corridors, slowly stamping his foot into the dust. His face shines with sweat, his breathing heavy. He bitterly mutters to himself, angry that, as it seems to him, he has no respect from those around him. Eventually, he reaches the cage of the winged captive. It hangs on heavy chains, and her body constantly reflects the price of imprisonment. Gorgon mocks her, full of scornful praise, extolling her endurance while simultaneously humiliating her heritage. His voice drips with arrogant superiority. To break her spirit, he makes an empty deal. He demands her name and promises to waive the next daily session of torture in exchange for obedience. He warns. Time is running out and someone else might speak first, but she stands silently and defiantly, a shadow against cold stone wall. She snaps her gaze in mockery of unbreakable defiance. Blood slowly trickles from the corner of her mouth, and her eyes blaze with a silent, deadly promise to her tormentors. Her insolence is cut off by a cruel, sharp strike from the Inquisitor. The force of the blow jerks her head to the side, and blood sprays into the air. He has not stopped yet. Breaking free completely, the bald man draws a weapon, a short metallic click, and his face contorts into a mask of pure rage. The interrogator whines about the grueling nature of his duties, hissing that he is forced to break 3 high-level demons every day, an ungrateful, exhausting job. He warns the prisoner not to confuse her status with safety. His patience with their silence has reached an absolute limit. He presses the cold barrel of the pistol to her cheek. His voice slides into a threatening whisper as he hints that getting rid of just one of them would not be a great loss for the military. When the tension is about to snap, a tall man in a white lab coat intervenes. He places a calm hand on the interrogator's hand and orders him to wait. The newcomer maintains a calm but firm tone and reminds his colleague, "This entire institution operates under the strict jurisdiction of LT Call SH Wesen." He emphasizes that a hasty execution is not only a breach of protocol, but also a waste of a valuable asset, especially since their farsighted plans depend on the cooperation of each high-ranking demon in their custody. Under the pressure of this logic, the interrogator lowers his weapon and, through clenched teeth, agrees. He acknowledges that he does not have the authority to decide the fate of such valuable prisoners. And the demon remains bound and silently watches them because she remains bound and silent while the researcher looks at her, focusing on the vital importance of the harpy species and feeling relief that the captive has been preserved. The researcher explains. The careful assembly of the dark selection as preparation for escape is almost complete, and any disruption now would jeopardize the entire operation. He is met with explosive rage. He snorts disdainfully at the very idea of her interference and refuses to obey the orders of someone he considers an imposter. Regaining his authority, the soldier declares that the tortures in this institution are solely his responsibility and draws his pistol again. Indifferently, he adds, killing a few demons during interrogation means nothing to him. He keeps shouting while she simply turns her back to his outburst. Her voice flows with poisonous mockery as she says the situation is a real disgrace. She emphasizes, by behaving so recklessly, he is effectively undermining his own path to promotion. After these words, the man clearly freezes and falls silent. Mention of career growth stops him in his tracks and he demands an explanation of what exactly she means when she talks about losing such an opportunity. The researcher responds only with a dark, all-knowing smile, so the true essence of the chance and the consequences of his outburst of anger remain shrouded in mystery. The lieutenant colonel's proposal for a promotion hung in the air. High subordinate responded with a sharp, skeptical laugh. Gorgon dismissed the idea as a cruel joke. He could not understand how such an opportunity could arise from their current grim duties. He broke out in sweat and his thoughts raced frantically. What Yakov really intended. He thought, as a man already entrenched in the dirty work of interrogations, he could rise even higher unless it was a miscalculated move. To use Gorgona's own efforts to secure a place among the elite in royal military intelligence. This line of thought was interrupted by the researcher. He stepped forward with a confident look to confirm the same suspicions. He stated that Lieutenant Colonel was indeed going to place a serious new responsibility on Gorgon's shoulders, entrusting him with an educational role. A tall man in a robe in the laboratory laid out the plan step by step. The formation of a specialized unit in the intelligence department, a unit that would extract secrets from demonic prisoners without the finality of death. He stated that Gorgon is set as the cornerstone of this new interrogation department. Stunned by this outcome, Officer Stout lunged forward and pressed the researcher against the cold stone wall, demanding an explanation of how some medical officer could know such high-level military secrets and internal plans. He did not budge for a moment from the physical confrontation, calmly recounted how he heard Lieutenant Colonel praising the exceptional qualities of Gorgon in conversations with other high-ranking officials during their recent trips. The researcher painted the image of a commander who held his subordinate in the highest esteem. Then he laid out the stakes of this moment, explaining that it was a test of the Gorgon's dignity. He emphasized, the Dark Healer was summoned only so the demons could survive the process. If the prisoner dies, Lieutenant Colonel's faith will crumble, and the promised promotion will vanish like smoke. Realizing the full seriousness of the situation, the officer, out of distrust, fell into despair and issued orders rapidly. Start treatment immediately. The researcher complied, casting a restrained, conscious glance, satisfied that his words had worked as intended and gained access to the prisoner. Hearing a firm slap on the shoulder while the officer admits his past mistakes in judgments, the boy lifts his gaze, his facial expression slightly clears, and even surprises. The man confesses that he was completely wrong about him. In response, the young healer remains modest and insists that he simply did what was expected of him. The officer, noticeably drenched in sweat from relief, sincerely and warmly thanks him for preventing a major mistake from happening at the last second. Standing at full height, the officer solemnly introduces himself, Second Lieutenant Gorgon Svetlaka. He sincerely apologizes for past cruelty and physical violence, stating that he now sees the boy as a partner worthy of his full confidence and trust. Their hands clasp firmly in a strong handshake, sealing a bond built on deception. While the lieutenant feels a wave of genuine respect, the boy tells himself that he has already gained much more trust than necessary and is still satisfied that this time everything can be allowed to stay as it is. In his gaze is a cold, sharp focus as he looks away from the new ally. Inside, he acknowledges the bitter truth. Despite this newly gained support, the man before him will most likely not live to see the next day. Throughout the kingdom, the atmosphere is changing and we step onto the crowded platforms of the royal capital's station. Lieutenant Colonel Yakov Shuizin stands among the travelers, and the distant sound of fanfares marks his return. He is exhausted, thinking only of delivering his last intelligence report and finally breaking free to go home after a grueling week apart. He imagines how his beloved Ari is waiting for him with warm homemade food. Usually this thought makes him extremely calm, but a shadow of doubt still slips through his mind. He silently hopes that today she hasn't prepared anything like red wine or thick meat broth. He is filled with disgust by a series of vivid, terrible, memorist metallic stench of demon blood and the sight of shattered, blackened limbs. These ghosts of the interrogation room are so overwhelming that even in the safety of the capital, his stomach churns. He still cannot pull himself together when a voice cuts through the station's hum and calls out his rank and name. Artemis Aretusa, one of the key figures of the church kingdom, approaches him. She holds the title saint and ranks fourth among their female clergy. She offers him a ride home. Her polite smile hides any hidden intentions. He is momentarily stunned, falters and stumbles over his words as he accepts. They settle on the back seat of a sleek black car, and she warmly greets him on his return from a recent mission. He looks at her through the rearview mirror, showing gratitude, and at the same time asking how she could have found him at all among the dense crowd of travelers. He becomes confused when she responds with a mysterious smile and confesses. She did not come across this by accident. She was waiting specifically for his arrival. Then she shifts the conversation to the young guy, Kiwi Alaya, and confesses that it was she who passed information about the Dark Healer to the intelligence department. Elsewhere, the researcher reports that the boy remained unusually silent and appeared deep in thought during transport. This underscores the fragile, unspoken alliance between the military and the church. She sat in the moving vehicle and spoke about the grim truth of the interrogation. The conversation turned to Kiwi Alaya. It was noted that the boy was most likely being pushed to the absolute limit physically and mentally by those who must break him. As the car rhythmically made its way through city streets, he threw out a phrase that keeping a hospital for monsters is a disgrace to divine teachings, a sin that will undoubtedly bring heavenly punishment. Realizing he might have spoken too harshly before the saint, he hurriedly apologized, but she only responded with a calm, all-knowing smile. Her face changed and a zeal bordering on anxiety flashed in her eyes. She agreed with his assessment. She spoke with eerie certainty, her gaze fixed on some distant point as if she saw the very soul of the boy they were talking about. She continued her sermon, declaring that the saints are blessed, but everyone who harbors demons must be punished. In her opinion, the very presence of the Dark Healer is corruption that cannot be tolerated or allowed to roam freely throughout the kingdom. He could only silently agree, yet a drop of sweat still ran down his temple. Beside him, she remained the embodiment of grace, hands folded neatly and her face consistently gentle and unmoving. Despite her outward submissiveness, he could no longer shake his anxiety. He was gnawed by the power of her focus, and he did not understand why a woman of such standing was so deeply concerned with the fate of just one doctor. Nevertheless, she stood her ground, firmly stating that such dangerous conspirators must not be set free, and specifically emphasized that Kiwi Alaya must remain under their control. A dark suspicion began to grow in his mind as he looked at her, and he had no idea whether her obsession truly concerned the boy's profession or something much more personal. Her internal conflict did not concern her. She decided that for the world it was mercy, let the boy spend the rest of his days in a cage, and never see the sign again. While she remained lost in her cold convictions, the car surged forward, pushing away the heavy atmosphere. He clung to the decision to bury his doubts. He drove away anxious thoughts, and his mind was drawn to the warmth of home and the beloved one waiting for his return. He lies staring at the ceiling of his Spartan quarters, the weight of the recent conversation with Artemis pressing heavily on his thoughts. Outside the walls, the sterile, silent corridor of the institution stretches on, indifferent to the moral conflict ripening inside him. Returning to the depths of the prison, he stands before a winged captive, her wrists bound high with heavy chains. She lashes out at him with a look full of both hatred and exhaustion. She sees in him yet another tormentor in a white coat, and he admits to himself her reaction is entirely justified. The medic kneels on one knee and gets down to her level. He speaks quietly, giving a promise that here in this darkness seems impossible, that she will not be held here forever and that very soon she will fly again. His words hit straight to the heart. For a moment the mad demon mask tears off, revealing a flash of stunned disbelief and a crumb of hope that she had long buried. He holds firm, does not look away, as he explains that his words are not just comfort for her, but a vow to himself. The inner decision hardens. He cannot allow this inhuman treatment to continue endlessly. As a healer, his duty is clear. He must act immediately to tear these patients from prolonged torment, no matter the cost to his own standards. Taking the first step toward disobedience, he extends his hand. The palm flashes with a barely noticeable, ethereal light as he begins to interfere with the magical mechanisms of the heavy chains. When the die is cast, the winged captive and her huge horned companion look at the small barred window. The pale light of the moon signals has finally awakened in time for their escape. She processes the secret message sent through the shadows. The plan is already set for tomorrow, immediately after the interrogation during Dark Heel. The instructions are clear. If she is ready to risk everything, she must give a sign of consent, bend the index finger 3 times in a row. Her heart beats wildly, and she prepares to give the signal that will change their fates forever. As she steps onto this dangerous path, the medical officer rests in the silence of his quarters, his face a mask of stern, unbreakable resolve. He stares into the darkness above him, and the air hangs heavy with the weight of inevitable betrayal as he whispers to himself. For him, the choice has already been made. Tomorrow is the day he will finally put an end to all this ordeal. The morning sun rises over the stone walls, marking the long-awaited day of escape. Gorgon Svetlika greets his colleagues with a loud guffaw, throwing out that yesterday's injuries look like trifles so they can continue the interrogation as planned. He leans back in his chair and whistles a carefree tune while sending the swing away to start work. In passing, he orders the young man, make sure the prisoner is fully restored for the next round of interrogations. The doctor approaches the gigantic, shackled figure of the demon and runs his fingers over the cold metal of the chains. He sees that determination was planted in the captive long ago, and with a barely noticeable nod, prepares to launch the final stage of their plan. From behind the table in the corner, The officer calls across the hall impatient to see how the legendary skills of the kingdom's most sinister dark healer will finally come into play. He places a calm hand on the prisoner's hand, and a dark, crackling energy begins to pulse wildly in the air. He whispers a quiet apology for the delay, acknowledging that the journey here was long and led precisely to this fateful moment. His eyes widen harshly and almost desperately as he commands the demon to unleash all his fury. In response, the prisoner suddenly opens his eyes wide, and a restored yet terrible light flashes within them. With a deafening crack, a gigantic fist shatters the stone slab and heavy iron shackles as if they were fragile glass. The valuable demon stands 2 tall, wounds vanished, strength fully returned, and looms over the frightened officer. Gorgon retreats in horror. Former confidence crumbles, turning into a desperate realization that the monster he just unleashed can no longer be restrained. He looms over the trembling officer, a predatory smile stretching across his face, and remarks on the unprecedented hospitality he has received throughout his long life. Gorgon, bound and gasping, can only manage to utter a strangled question about who his tormentor is. Panic engulfs the hall while the officer's mind races. He desperately tries to understand whether this sudden bloody madness is a twisted test orchestrated by Lieutenant Colonel Schwiesen. Amid the commotion, the young doctor stands silently a witness to the unfolding slaughter. The tall researcher steps forward with a chillingly calm expression. He throws a false apology to the dying man and shows that every word spoken yesterday was a fabrication. He watches with cold indifference as the demon's large hand squeezes the officer's throat. With a disgusting series of cracks, the demon releases all his power, and the echo of bones crunching rolls through the chamber. The researcher turns to the boy, noting with dark irony, "Even a dark healer has limits, and cannot so thoroughly restore a life that has already faded." The beast looks down at its victim as if doubting the man's disbelief, then mockingly addresses him by rank and orders him to accept this inevitability. After this, the final, brutal blow sounds along with a wet, crisp noise that ends the struggle. Standing amid the silence after everything, the demon looms over the broken remains, and the researcher muses aloud, confused about how military promotion occurs for those who die in service to the kingdom. Looking away from the body, the gigantic creature turns to the boy directly, sincerely thanking the one he calls Dark Healer. She asks the child's name, and the boy simply replies, "Kiwi." The demon proclaims his own name, Ajido, and his voice thunders now with new respect as he insists. His savior needs no formal titles or forms of address when speaking to him. He stood upright, his gigantic figure sharply contrasting against the slender man in a lab coat who was now talking about complex alliances. The researcher explained that being a demon and being an ally are entirely different things, and his true intentions are much subtler than mere hostility. Casting a piercing glance, the demon demanded to be told the true purpose, admitting that the mysterious messages he had received earlier still failed to reveal what exactly the man desired regarding the fate of Ajido's kin, who had already been freed. He asked what would happen to them after liberation. In response, the slender figure admitted a brief one-sided message was insufficient to convey the depth of his plan. He explained that he had deliberately not revealed the whole picture until now to avoid any grounds for possible misunderstanding of his motives. Then he clearly voiced his final demand, to ask the demon for help to get to the demon kingdom. He spoke in a desperate outburst, explaining that he needed Agitos for the escape to become a reality. The warrior weighed the logic of the proposal. The Dark Healer really would not find refuge within the human kingdom and would naturally seek a new life among demons. He decided, at least for now, to take the man at his word and watch his actions closely. He finally gave his word, promising, if they manage to escape together with his fellow prisoners, he will personally escort this man to the demon kingdom. After such assurance, the researcher felt noticeably lighter. He noted that the first major test of their plan was already behind them. While the deal was being made, the man in the robe quietly pondered how deadly dangerous everything had become. He glanced at Kiwi and the demon, understanding that his survival entirely depended on whether the creature would remain rational. In the worst case, they could have killed him before he finished his sentence. He watched the demon closely, feeling the hatred for humans that still burned inside him, yet at the same time marveled at his incredible restraint. The current alliance rested on a shaky foundation, an equal measure of trust and suspicion, a 50-50 parity lottery for their shared future. He is making his way through the corridors of cold stone, and the next step of their escape is already racing through his mind. He emphasizes urgently, they must move immediately to free the other Speckos. Only by gaining the trust of the demon Chin will he be able to guarantee his survival in the long term. The researcher's gaze hardened, cold, calculated determination. He understands, as long as Ajido sees him as an indispensable tool, his safety is guaranteed, and he is ready to show the full power of his dark medical skill to prove his own worth. Their path leads to the western wing of the sprawling prison complex's strategic move, to return the first of the captured comrades, Ajido. Approaching the designated cell, they find a harpy named Halloween. She gasps in shock upon seeing her leader. Ajito's voice softens with relief as he acknowledges her survival, but he immediately suppresses their emotional reunion to avoid alarming the nearby guards. Turning to another ally, the bipedal avian demon named Forte, Ajito orders him to keep a sharp watch on the patrols, then gestures towards the young Kiwi and asks the boy to look after Halyuan's visible injuries. Before the boy could take a step, the medical officer cuts him off with words, a calm voice as he announces that the work is already done. Just a slight accent of straight hand, the torn wings of the harpies begin to stitch back together. The feathers regain their shine in an instant. She silently and stunnedly looks at the restored limbs, barely able to believe the evidence of her own sensations. Ajito watches as the miracle unfolds, grimly confirming. This is not an illusion, but the indisputable work of a master. He admits even the most skilled healers from the demonic realm could not match such incredible speed. The researcher merely casts a knowing glancing hint that his methods rely on secrets far beyond ordinary medicine. He began by clarifying a key detail about the magic he had just performed. The dark heal cast on 3 was a specialized version, and for anyone else it would have been completely ineffective. Continuing his story, he admitted that he spent days carefully crafting this spell, tailoring it to their unique racial structures and individual traits. With a slight irony, he said that his former role as an assistant during interrogations gave him exactly the knowledge without which such a matter would be impossible. Ajito could only listen silently, digesting the full weight of this statement. Without warning, the man fell onto the stone floor, pressing his forehead to the ground, a deep gesture of apology that drove the demons mad with shock. Remaining in his modest place, he admitted, he stood aside and watched them suffer for too long, lacking the strength to intervene. This inaction made him leave them a week ago, and he did not raise his head until he fully showed the depth of his guilt. Ajito, however, remained cautious. He did not understand why the person decided to display their failures right now. He reminded the researcher that he had already seen their suffering with cold, indifferent eyes in the past. Because of this, the sudden display of vulnerability was hard to reconcile with that. Internally, the researcher admitted, it is impossible to truly erase the deep-rooted hatred that these demons held towards him as a person. He perceived this confessional language as a necessary settling of scores for his past crimes and thought about how best to handle the inevitable moment when their resentment might flare up. He understood, it is enough to fully expose oneself and suddenly, powerfully strengthen the bond of synchronicity between them, aligning goals through shared vulnerability. With renewed determination, he swore, if they could accept him, he would give all his strength and all his intellect to ensure their safe return to the demon realm, considering this agreement the only way to truly guarantee the success of their escape. He calculated the odds. As a dark healer, his value remained high for these 3. If Ajito, their leader, decided to accept his offer, the other 2 would be forced to support this decision. Then pressure would work, and among the captives, a unanimous agreement would form. With a sharp, impatient smile, the researcher stubbornly demanded an answer and pushed Ajito to speak. He insisted that he needed words of forgiveness, permitted to obtain an official verbal commitment that would seal their agreement. Halyuan addresses her fellow captive women, and her voice is steady as she rejects the idea that Kiwi Alaya abandoned them. Insisting that there can be no question of his desertion for their Kosesh, speaks with such conviction that it compels them to listen. Her words make Ajito shudder with genuine shock. She continues and tells in more detail how Kiwi dared at his own risk, covering her with his own body from the barrel of the guard's rifle the previous day. When she continues to testify, telling about her readiness to die but not to submit to their interrogators, the medical officer remains lying on the floor. He is increasingly gripped by growing astonishment, realizes that everything is unfolding in a way he could never have predicted. She does not stop and tells how Kiwi survived a weapon strike, but remains steadfast in defending her while she herself admits that at that moment she felt anger. Now she is convinced. All this was a calculated move, a step necessary to reach this very turning point. This revelation seems to confirm Ajito's suspicions. He growls in approval and notes that it was definitely a covert operation coordinated between him and the boy. Nearby, a winged captive watches in surprise, and the researcher freezes in shock at the purely absurd story unfolding around him. Noticing the man lying on the floor, she gives him a smile of deep gratitude and gives his presence the fact that she is still alive, so she did not die in vain. He only stammers in response, trying to downplay his role, saying it is worth nothing. Suddenly, the warmth disappears from her face, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. She sharply narrows her gaze, echoing his words back to him, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She presses the deadly point tightly to his forehead before he can move with terrifying calm. She warns, there must be no misunderstandings about their current alliance and his place in it. She leans in very close. Her gaze is stern but with hidden vulnerability as she demands that he accept her gratitude without any hesitation, rejecting the very idea that her words are mere social politeness. He can only manage an awkward apology in response, scratching his cheek while trying to process the sudden shift in her mood. The exchange is interrupted by a giant demon. He states that such gratitude is quite natural. The demon admits his own surprise. His subordinates were protected in a place he could not reach and says he cannot hold on to anger. With a heavy heart, the giant solemnly and sincerely thanks, and nearby a quiet sob reveals how deep an emotional blow this news dealt to the others. The medical officer extends his hand thoughts race, because the situation defies any prediction. He confidently expected that she would hate him for participating in the experiments, but here she stands and thanks him in such a way that he sees her for the first time in a completely different, kinder light. She turns away, her face flushes with shame and overwhelming emotions, and through tears she insists that he is truly a good person for what he has done. Suddenly, a sharp mechanical alarm signal thundered in the corridor, and it tore apart that brief moment of connection. The sound passes through the group with a sharp impulse of urgency, and the horned warrior instantly understands. The guards have already found a breach. They must move immediately if they want to escape to the demon realm before the facility is locked down. He turns to Kiwi and states that there are two possible strategies for escape. Kiwi is fully focused, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. The researcher watches them, his face is grim as he considers the options. This man of science adds, an unquestionable escape requires a plan for the moment immediately after the prisoners are freed. He lays out the options into two separate categories, raising two fingers to emphasize his point. The first option is a desperate race against time. They try to cross the border before the authorities can react to the breach. The second is to activate the power of Agito to seize control of the facility and create a safety buffer before they make their final move. They weigh these decisions very carefully. Kiwi expresses a preference for the second method, arguing that first securing the facility gives a much higher chance of success. Agito stands straight. His silence says he is ready to bear the weight of this path. The strategic map shows danger. The kingdom's forces have already occupied the border areas. A direct flight will most likely immediately put them under the strike of a clamp, a closed trap. To avoid being crushed between the facility's guards and the border patrol, they must first neutralize the nearest threat behind them. Then he proposes another idea how to tip the scales in their favor. Agito looks at him inquisitively. What cold, deliberate thinking has been devised for their rescue? He proposes a brutal tactic. Instead of killing every guard, many should be left seriously wounded. This will force the reinforcements that arrive to first provide medical aid and evacuation, rather than chasing the fugitives. He acknowledges the cruelty of the plan, but says that Agito is the only one capable of carrying out such precise suppression. The warrior's face froze in a mask of stern determination. For a week the observer has been watching him and knows. The power Agito hides is more terrible than a swift death. If he truly unleashes his fury, the soldiers will understand they are begging not for revenge, but for mercy gratia. He stood silently while the medical officer announced his cold resolve, that he no longer cared whether he was called a monster. Having devoted a whole decade of his life to royal whims, the man made it clear. For the sake of his future, he would do whatever was necessary and not a drop of sympathy for those who imprisoned him. In response, the massive demon acknowledged this shift and noted that the spirit of the researcher had already equaled the spirit of the demons. He accepted the burden of this plan, entrusting the next steps to the calculated cruelty of the man. Then he observed how the young boy bowed his head in sincere gratitude and thanked them for taking his proposal seriously. The child insisted on sparing the kingdom's soldiers where possible and wanted to repay the small acts of kindness received while being held in this institution. The horned warrior pondered the boy's words and realized, it is precisely that innate kindness, the inability to truly be heartless, that makes him an exceptional healer. He saw that the boy's gentle nature was not a weakness, but the core of his personality. Nearby, the medic quietly let out a soft, ironic smile as soon as they started talking about his supposed kindness. He pondered how his actions were now perceived and found a strange humor in being praised for a virtue he had long since abandoned. Then he detailed the final escape plans. For a discreet meeting, he suggested the back exit of the West Wing. Meanwhile, the huge demon was already preparing to sow chaos and draw the guards' attention. Others were ordered to quietly start moving towards the exit. When the first agonizing cries of the guards echoed loudly through the stone corridors, he turned to the boy and urged him, "Don't slow down, keep moving." He ordered the child not to sympathize with those who had fallen and said that if anyone were to be blamed, the responsibility should lie with the military leaders who orchestrated it all. A tall man hurriedly ran through the corridors of the institution, setting direction and keeping a vigilant eye on any threats that might still remain. He understood. Direct combat must be avoided. They were currently unarmed and had to guarantee the boys' safety at all costs during their desperate escape. He watches as winged demons prepare their own assault. Helyuan and Forte clench their will, but Helyuan insists they cannot fall behind Agito's leadership as the chaos intensifies even more. With a sharp burst of speed, she takes off into the air and declares that they will strike with devastating speed. Breaking through the narrow space, she shouts Forte to cover them, while her wings beat heavily against the stale air. The blurred trail of movement cuts through the corridor, proof of their deadly speed. Like the crown of a predatory bird, she swoops down on the naive guards, Claws find their target, and the men shudder with a scream from shock and agony. The guards barely manage to grasp the threat before their formation collapses under the fury of the attack. Meanwhile, the bird demon tears through the opposition with sharp claws. Its movements whirl through feathers and violence. Halloween shouts a warning to his enemies, making it clear. This is not some rabble, but an elite aviation unit serving directly under the command of Ajido. In fear that tears the chest apart, the remaining guards rush to retreat. Boots pounded on the cold floor until they realized they had been completely outplayed. They hang for a moment amid the carnage, and Forte, with a grounded, joyless pride, admits, yes, they really are a formidable force, much stronger than their kidnappers could ever have imagined. Below, a young boy is visible, dragged into the very heart of the chaos. She lets out a calming scream and vows she will not allow a single scratch to fall on Kiwi while they continue this bloody escape. She glides through the air alongside her avian companion, and the same question that has haunted her since they were imprisoned spins again and again in her mind. If they are truly so powerful a force to be reckoned with, then how did they end up prisoners at all? Looking down at the ground, she recalls reports of the kingdom's sudden victory over the city of Eldon. The news claimed an undeniable triumph, but the reality how Ajido and the rest were so easily captured does not match the power she knows. His companion echoes the doubts. The attack came without warning, a harsh surprise that left them no time to prepare or build proper defenses. The destruction was unleashed by massive and unfamiliar siege engines. They tore through border fortifications as if they were paper, and the demonic forces were completely unprepared in the first moments of the invasion. In that chaos, the holy servants of the church deployed a gigantic sanctuary shelter, a shimmering dome of light created specifically to drain the power of any demonic creature caught within its field, almost depriving it of the ability to resist. She explains, under such conditions, fighting was impossible, yet someone had to buy time so that the civilians from Eldon could escape. Ajido and his elite guard decided to stay behind, sacrificing their freedom to ensure the survival of their people against an insurmountable force. Their defeat was finally sealed by the arrival of heroes, the kingdom's most elite warriors, whose ancient, consecrated power remains the best safeguard, far surpassing the capabilities of modern weapons and firearms. With a single gesture, the order was given to mark this area as holy ground, thus finally closing the trap that led to the capture of the demon's leadership. He was the guardian of the fall, but now another power began to manifest in the research institution. Halyuan and Forte suddenly jerked back, their bodies tensed, and the air was filled with such a crushing weight that it squeezed tightly. The researcher froze in place, eyes wide, gasping for air, unable to understand what could provoke such a brutal reaction in the captives. He looked down at the bird demon. It trembled and emitted a groan of pain. Halyuan's face was covered in sweat, teeth clenched, as if an invisible force was leaking directly from her chains. At first, the researcher was confused, but suddenly fear settled in his chest. He realized that the containment measures on the territory were being overwritten by an external presence. He sharply turned his head toward the entrance, and heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor. An old man in impeccably clean white church robes clenched a sacred book in his hands and entered the room with a sense of absolute calm, surveying the three demons. The priest said that if there were that many, he alone would be more than enough to deal with them. The medical officer's breath caught as soon as she realized the full gravity of the situation. Standing before her was a man she recognized, a high-ranking, holy church official. She watches as he reveals himself, Lucius Satinia, the 12th throne of the kingdom church. His face is marked by a mixture of distrust and icy determination as he surveys the area and contemplates how many more of these creatures might still be active. His hands grow stronger on the heavy sacred tome. He carries the source of his divine authority. Having examined the buried bodies of the harpy and the avian demon, he proclaims, their presence is darkness, an accumulation of sin that he can no longer tolerate. And swearing that their lawlessness will end henceforth, he prepares to unleash divine punishment. He raises the scroll high, dismissing any thoughts of failure, and instead embraces this encounter as a divine command to expel the unholy. He orders them to remember his name for the afterlife, while the medical officer and the young boy watch, increasingly lost. While he steadfastly holds to his holy mission, the researcher stands motionless in the sterile corridor and calmly points out that there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding between them. His accusations are directed entirely in the wrong place. Simply ignoring her logic, he snorts, convinced that her words are just a smokescreen meant to distract him. He believes such cunning maneuvers are a trademark of demonic influence, which he has sworn to eradicate. He continues the lecture, insisting that his divine words are high-level sacred art created to banish even the slightest hint of evil. The researcher only listens, her face revealing nothing as she acknowledges his unshakable confidence. He does not wait for objections, thrusts forward his shining writing and shouts with fanatical fervor. He commands all filth to get away and releases a dazzling burst of sacred energy aimed at erasing from the face of the earth the threat he considers demonic. The light washes her away, but when the glow fades, she still stands completely unharmed. He convulsively gulps air in disbelief, looking with trembling hands at the woman whom his divine verdict was supposed to turn to ashes. She calmly addresses his confusion and says that he got everything mixed up from the very beginning. She clarifies, she is not a demon, just an ordinary person, and adds that his holy arts work only against those born with a demonic or spiritual essence. Since she was born human, she explains, even her status as a dark healer does not make her vulnerable to his magic. He breaks out in a cold sweat, desperately tries to find logic in how his advantage in physical parameters when he was young suddenly does not work against her, and she just smiles and says he chose the wrong opponent. He looks at her in horror, unable to reconcile her words with how she looks. In his eyes, pale skin and dark hollows under the eyes are not signs of exhaustion. These are unmistakable traces of a ghoul or demon who has taken on a human form. Feeling his growing fear, she takes a slow, measured step toward him. As if casually saying, her pale, sickly skin and dark circles are just the result of her exhausting work, no more than the physical toll of labor. Before he can recover, she reaches out and skillfully snatches the sacred tome from his grip. He freezes, mouth wide open, and she confirms it with a chillingly calm gaze. Has no intention of running away. She calmly removed the sacred text, ignoring the old man's furious outcry. Having lived in the kingdom for over 2 decades, she knew well how the clergy channeled holy power through such relics and had no intention of letting him use it again. She gave a sharper rebuff while he continued demanding the return of the book and called the demons nothing but wild beasts. For her, however, they were intelligent beings who had shown her more kindness and protection than the church ever had. He spat that they are the cursed enemies of all humanity, and she just looked down at the writing in her hands. In a mocking tone, she asked if their own holy book does not command to love enemies, emphasizing the hypocrisy of his words. She was faster. When the priest, driven mad, lunged forward to grab the artifact, she sharply swung the heavy tome with cold precision and hit him right in the face, sending him back, writhing in pain. He was left to Lenito lick the wounds on his bruised pride and face, while she turned her attention to the 2 demons standing nearby. She sincerely thanked Halyuan and Forte for their timely intervention. She listened as the bird warrior replied. Their debt was mutual, and it was her decisive move she snatched the scroll that ultimately allowed them to break free from the magical chains. The young boy urged them faster, feeling how the atmosphere changed while the harpy averted her gaze in shy uncertainty. He knew they had to get out of here before reinforcements arrived. He watched as she thanked him for his reliability during the Chris's usual restraint faltered for a moment. Her companion couldn't resist and began teasing her for how indirectly she showed gratitude, so the winged demon sharply and defensively cut him off in response. She watches from the edge while the researcher glances back at the fallen priest and coldly remarks that her healing arts are not meant for humans. The bent man lies motionless on the cold floor. The defeat is final. A woman leads forward to the western exit, and beside her walks a gigantic demon who loudly wonders if they are too late to escape. They stand before heavy doors. The weight of their situation presses down on them. They are gathering with the rest of the fugitives, and the harpy asks if the plan to capture this institution was abandoned halfway. The demon instantly rejects this idea, stating that their progress was exactly as intended. The path they left behind serves as a grim testament to their strength, a corridor littered with unconscious and broken bodies of the kingdom's soldiers. Moans of pain echo through the passage, marking the trail of their bloody passage. He explains, every guard who crossed the site was neutralized with devastating forcing. The researcher is stunned by how quickly it was done. She adds, others thought the fight would last about 5 minutes, but they clearly underestimated the demon's true capabilities. Standing still while dark energy swirls around him, the warrior urges the whole group, move immediately before the hero's elite squad can intercept them. The researcher, feeling the weight in his words, asks if, even in this state, he would consider the hero too difficult an opponent to handle. He admits this with a chilling calmness. A clash with a hero is a deadly risk, and he predicts that in just 2 minutes of fighting, one of them will definitely be dead. The weight of this statement hangs in the air, sharpening the feeling that danger still threatens them. Spreading torn wings for takeoff, the demon adds one last oppressive thought to the escape plan. Now the departure becomes unquestionably urgent. They are preparing to leave this institution behind forever. She watched as the huge demon turned his gaze to the medical officer, a low and heavy voice, full of warning. He explained, yes, she was indeed being taken to the demon kingdom, but her arrival would not be met with open arms. Many would regard a human, especially one like her, from her former status with deep distrust and hostility, and this could endanger her life. She nodded solemnly, fully aware of the precariousness of her position. After having been an interrogator's assistant, she harbored no illusions that escape would be easy or that the demonic people would easily forgive her past. She accepted as fact that a peaceful life was by no means guaranteed. Her acknowledgement of the risks did not stop him. On the contrary, he reached for her and with unexpected tenderness pressed her into his massive embrace, giving a grim but unwavering promise, swearing that he and his kin would do everything in their power to protect her from anyone who dared to harm her. She sharply inhaled from the unexpected gesture and the weight of his confession. She raised her eyes to him wide open, uncertain, and asked if they really wanted to protect her from their own. He said no more words of comfort and ordered her to hold on while they prepared to leave the land behind. She held tightly to him as he strained his strong legs and spread his wings to their full, threatening width. With the final resounding proclamation, he announced their departure, signaling it was time to return to the lands of the Demon Kingdom. He surged upward, leading a small group of fugitives into the sky. Below, the roofs of the human settlement shrank along their path as they ascended into the future, where hope and the threat of pursuing the hero walk side by side. The face of Yakov Shisen twists with rage as he listens to the catastrophic report from the northern city of Belsen. The news is terrible. Every demonic prisoner has disappeared from the facility. The breakout cost Deerlight and soldiers dead, and the rest of the 45-man garrison either seriously wounded or in critical condition. The most shocking is the death of Shuz, one of the few elite high-ranking warriors of the kingdom. He imagined a completely different outcome, believing that capturing Dark Healer would be his decisive piece on the chessboard. With the help of the boy, he expected to extract vital information about the strength and movements of the demon army and, thus secure a promotion to a high position in the military intelligence department. This success was supposed to be his ticket to a stable future, even to finally visit Ares' parents and legitimize their relationship. But now those dreams have shattered. Standing over his desk in the silence of the office, he feels the weight of defeat settling on him. Although he immediately gave the order to pursue the fugitives, they vanished without a trace. There was no sign of their path. He harshly reproaches himself, wondering if the situation could have been saved if he had called for reinforcements from the main military base the moment the alarm was raised. His subordinate, Gorgon Svetlaka, freezes in place and explains the logic of the tactical delay. When there are so many lives at stake and demons are still hiding in the ruins of the building, the decision was made. In chaos, prioritize rescue and medical aid. The search for the escaped was deemed a secondary task against the backdrop of saving those who remained alive. The explanation only fuels his rage. His teeth clench in a silent growl. To him, the decision to prioritize the wounded over capturing such high-value targets is a catastrophic miscalculation. He cannot comprehend how they allowed such a critical source of information to slip through their hands for the sake of a few soldiers. The cold realization grows as the search on site yields a strange find. Among the debris and fallen remains, there is no trace of the body of Dark Healer. The boy did not just break free, he disappeared completely, leaving emptiness where his death was supposed to be. He stared into the distance, while his thoughts raced through the most insidious options. If the boy didn't just run away but conspired with demons and led the escape, the consequences would be catastrophic. Such betrayal means that his own decision when he recruited the Devil's Child was fundamentally wrong, and this will definitely end his career. His face twists into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, and he, muttering curses softly, whispers curses at the boy. Dark Healer, the very tool he intended to use for his ascent, instead became the instrument of his demise, drowning carefully constructed plans in the mud. While the lieutenant colonel examines the kingdom, attention shifts to the very heart of the Demon Kingdom, to the capital Delmont, where the dark castle towers amid an eternal storm. Inside the castle, the man who managed to break free from the claws of the kingdom sits in silence and contemplation. 5 days have passed since he fled Belsen and successfully crossed into the demonic world. He doubts whether his asylum request succeeded because he knows all too well the world rarely grants such easy victories. He remains sitting in the luxurious hall with high ceilings overwhelmed by the lavish architecture and the giant flowering tree filling the space. For him, the journey was only a prologue. The real trial begins now. He waits for his exile status to be officially recognized. His gaze sharpened sharply as he waited, although he was ordered to stay in this particular cell. Prolonged silence and isolation are already beginning to weigh on him. Returning to the window, he watches as nearly torn flashes of lightning cut through the darkened sky. He is irritated by this irony. Even during the day, the weather is so bleak. Involuntarily, he wonders if clothes can even dry in such humidity, and finds himself longing for the warmth of the sun he left behind. A sudden movement in the garden outside the window cuts through his melancholic thoughts and draws his gaze. He leans forward and notices a small, bright figure amid the fluttering butterflies. There among the flowers, a young girl with dark skin and starry eyes plays with a winged insect and a small round creature. You can't help but let out a quiet breath of wonder, so much life in such a sad place. She turns to him, a bright, curious smile, and her butterfly-like features twitch. She introduces herself as Milta and asks the stranger who he is. She watched as the young boy introduced himself as Kiwi Aaliyah and inquired about her connection to the Demon King's castle. Amilta reprimanded him for his lack of manners despite his age, and then introduced a strange, fluffy creature in her arms as my all. Although it looked like an ordinary plush toy, it was very much alive. The animal reacts to light. Large, dark, it freezes, tightly entwined with a shadow. Its breathing is even and deep, confirming that it is biological. When the medical officer exclaimed in surprise about the monster, she simply nodded, calmly smiling and confirming his conclusion. He leaned closer, enchanted by the exhibit, and noted that in all his research he had never seen such a species. It seemed to be a bizarre hybrid of phantom cat or a living cotton pillow and made him ponder the complexities of its internal anatomy. He examined the creature more closely and scrutinizingly. His gaze fell on a strange detail that demanded explanation, a zigzag stitch line on the side. He asked what could have caused resorting to such a procedure. She explained, Mayal suffers from a recurrent disease. Every month malignant tumors appear in her body, requiring constant surgical interventions. The healer immediately recognized the rough but effective stitches, saying that's how a surgeon works, but Amilta clarified the harsh truth. Traditional dark magic won't help here. If used, the tumors will grow back even faster than healthy flesh recovers. Thank you for watching. She looked up at him with large, hopeful eyes and asked if such a famous dark healer as he could find a way to truly cure the creature's ailment. He fell silent for a moment, struck by the thought that the demon realm still clung to such primitive, intrusive medical techniques. He admitted that he could not promise an easy treatment without a proper investigation, but asked for permission to conduct a preliminary examination. With her consent, he touched it and the creature quietly emitted a soft, inquisitive sound in response. His eyes suddenly widened, and at that very moment a clear, sharp insight came as he looked deeper into the state of the being. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead, and he whispered to himself one single, convulsive question. What exactly is he seeing? He quietly strokes the creature's soft fur, feeling the rhythmic rises and falls of its breathing as it peacefully rests under his hand. Continuing the examination, he flips the small creature to inspect the serrated seam running across its underside. His fingers probe the unusual anatomy with cold, clinical curiosity. This discovery explodes in him with an attack of maniacal laughter, eyes wide open, in them the excitement of a new medical puzzle. Having treated countless monsters, he feels deep down, this one is truly exceptional. It turns out that the creature is a synthetic living organism, a chimera stitched together from different species, and its conflicting biological traits cause malignant tumors to break through to the outside. Sitting at the table, he thoughtfully reflects on his duality. He admits that he is drawn to wealth as a dark healer, but his passion for research is much greater, and he finds it incredibly pleasing to see his accumulated knowledge applied to such a unique specimen. With a firm grip in his glove, he decides, the chance for new medical breakthroughs makes this matter too valuable to ignore. He directs all his energy, and a faint glow barely trembles at his fingertip as he analyzes the tumor. The kingdom's standard transplant technique eluting and absorbing the affected tissue does not work. The synthetic origin of the creature breaks the usual treatment patterns. Next to her, a young girl with a heavy heart looks at her pet and says that they found this creature alone in the garden without parents, and it became her very first friend. The confession makes him fall silent for a moment as he contemplates the weight of her place. She continues a sincere plea, explaining how all my trust and care warmed her when she was lonely. She reveals, her father searched many dark healers trying to save the creature, but none could help. While she speaks, the healer does not take his eyes off the creature. He is struck by her complex biological structure. He notes, in this country, dark healers usually specialize in specific race such as vampires or werewolves, so a rare case like Mayal is beyond his expertise. Sensing that he is holding back, she asks if he is even listening to her. The despair of the young girl bursts out when she realizes that he is ignoring her entire story. He calmly hushes her and says that there is deep concentration in full swing right now, so silence is needed for work. Turning his gaze back to the work, he admits, completely stopping regeneration now is really difficult, but he has already managed to control the immediate swelling. He says that in 10 minutes the inflammation will spread to other cells, and this so surprises the leaves that they simply become confused. He simplifies his explanations for her and says directly, the operation he previously considered necessary is no longer needed. She looks at him intently with distrust, their eyes wide, as she tries to comprehend this sudden good news. The conversation is interrupted by an official announcement addressed to Lord Kiwi Ali. The messenger reports, preparations for his audience with the Demon King are complete, so he must depart immediately. Just as he is about to leave, a huge, heavy stone slab begins to screech and split apart, grinding with a deafening roar. The entire mechanism hints by its scale, the path ahead is of decisive importance. The path leads straight to the huge double doors at the end of the long flower alley. The weight of the upcoming meeting hangs in the air. The entrance to the inner sanctuary is already waiting, ready to receive everyone. Amilta freezes in place, tightly gripping Mayal, and her mind cannot keep up with what happened. The healer's sudden departure throws her off track. She only stammers in a confused language, staring bewildered, not believing her own eyes. Meanwhile, Kiwi stops at the threshold of the heavy doors and gives a brief, polite farewell. He says he has other matters, hinting that they may cross paths again before he leaves the room. Leaving the young girl behind, he reaches out to the huge doors of the inner sanctuary. As soon as his fingers touch the cold surface, his last hesitations creep away. It is time to prove his worth to the ruler of this land. With a firm push, the doors open, and the corridor is flooded with dazzling, ethereal light, a sign that his audience is beginning. A man with sharp features and light hair shudders and painfully presses his forehead with his hand, as if calming a sudden sharp headache. In the space of the majestic auditorium, where columns tower, a small group stands before a distant throne. A loud voice echoes through the hall, greeting Kiwi Alaya in the very heart of the demon kingdom. Next to the seated ruler stands a woman of extraordinary impressiveness. Her long dark hair falls over a light white dress. She introduces the man on the throne as the sovereign of the demon kingdom, Ogron, with a stern and majestic face. He looks down with cold authority, and his identity is confirmed: Lumek Ogron. Behind him, high-ranking demons who were once captive watch the scene, mixing excitement with anxiety. Pure power stunned him. The young healer falls to one knee, bows his head, demonstrating complete submission. He understands, to secure his status as a defector and find safety, he will have to endure any humiliation or trial that comes next. The Lord orders him to raise his head, and the voice sounds surprisingly without malice. He officially welcomes the boy and again emphasizes his title, ruler of these lands. Seeing that the boy still hesitates, he softens his voice a little and urges him to set aside this too rigid formality. He looks with such tension that it can be felt even in the air. His eyes narrow as he carefully examines the boy before him. Looking at the ruler, Kiwi notices his own prejudices. He had imagined the demon lord as a much more powerful figure, but healing countless monsters taught him one cannot judge a creature solely by its appearance. The ruler begins with sincere thanks and acknowledges. It was Kiwi who took the initiative and freed his valuable subordinates Ajido and Halloween. He says that Kiwi was famous as a renowned dark healer in the kingdom, but here his appearance is truly an important event, and he expects great achievements from this new alliance. Shifting the conversation to more official matters, he asks for confirmation whether Kiwi really wants to switch to Ugron's side. Warning: customs and circumstances of the demon kingdom differ radically from the human world. Kiwi remains steadfast and confirms his intention without hesitation. Listening carefully, the young healer weighs those words and understands. The natural environment and the innate nature of demon citizens are factors he truly needs to understand if he wants to survive here. The harsh reality of the ongoing war hangs over the room, reminding that no nation would accept a defector from an enemy state out of kindness alone. The demon lord watches him closely, waiting to see if his true worth matches the reputation he has. In the silence of the chamber hung a heavy question. Could someone like Kiwi Alaya truly sweep the past off their back and become a real enemy of the kingdom they once served? He decisively breaks the silence with a firm statement. As a dark healer, his duty to heal the wounds of demons does not change wherever he may be. At the end, politely bowing, he vows to give himself entirely to the service of the demonic lord. And the latter responds calmly and attentively, as if he already understands everything and speaks sincerely in a homely manner. He is still under a watchful, scrutinizing gaze. The Lord watches him with cold calculation and notes that the communication worked. The alien himself his audacity arouses curiosity, and the ruler decides to follow where this path leads, warning himself not to be deceived, for it is the devil's child. But not everyone in the hall shares this curiosity. A small gray-haired advisor explodes with rage. He points with a twitching finger at a person and screams madly that he is just a deer of malicious hatred, and demands immediate execution before any intrigues take root. Against the backdrop of the shouting, the senior general throws a cold, strategic counterargument. He insists, there is no logical reason for a person to betray right now, since the kingdom has already captured the southern city of Eldon and holds the advantage. And he concludes that any reasonable person would stick to the winning side, so such a defection is incredibly atypical. Diving straight into the heart of the debates, the gigantic horned prisoner named Ajido addresses his sovereign. He asks permission to speak frankly, and the ruler, leaning back in his chair, grants it with a drawn curtain. He stubbornly insists, without concrete evidence of espionage, they must first hear the boy's true intentions before passing judgment. Meanwhile, the young healer suddenly realizes, very demon he treated now risks his own position to protect him. The old advisor does not even think about stopping. His face is wildly red, and he shouts in a furious roar that they cannot wait for something bad to happen. He insists. The only safe way is to immediately turn a person to ashes, and his voice cracks with despair and ruthless xenophobia. The ruler's patience is finally cracking. With a cold, sharp gaze, he orders the old man to be silent. The voice cuts through the hysterical screams like a blade. Before he can utter a single word, he snaps his fingers and a magical snake appears from the advisor's mouth, closing it with a sharp metallic click. The old demon, shocked, widens his eyes. His protests are silenced by his master's whim. He sat majestically on his throne and solemnly offered an official apology for the disrespect committed by his subordinates. Before him stood a young healer, acknowledging that the suspicions were quite natural given the circumstances. The boy assured the ruler that he had no ill intentions, especially considering the state of gratitude he felt for the shelter provided to him. Riff. Catching the boy's words, he noticed in his voice something undeniable: sincerity. Yet the ruler still found no peace, for he knew despite this truth, the offense and resistance of his other high officials would not easily move from their place. He pondered what to do next, caught between the boy's truth and the harsh political reality of his own course. Suddenly, the heavy silence in the royal hall shattered as the massive doors thundered open and flew apart. The guard froze in shock. A figure had just appeared, breaking the sacred calm of the throne room. A small figure swiftly flew through the open door without looking back with reckless fury. It was a young girl. Her voice echoed down the corridor as she called for her father, her footsteps loudly striking the stone floor. She stopped abruptly, triumphantly raising her small, fluffy companion for display. With a joyful exclamation, she announced. The creature was fully healed and directly pointed to the young man, attributing the miracle to him. Nearby, the advisor nearly choked on shock, stunned that such a solemn event was interrupted by a child's outburst of emotion. The young healer could only freeze with wide-open eyes, breath caught as he realized the resonance of the girl's sudden conscious declaration. Her directness and sincere gratitude in her gaze sparkled, illuminating his appearance in the demon capital in a completely new light. While he stood frozen in shock, she rushed into the ruler's embrace, sincerely holding onto him. He was completely thrown off balance. His stern composure crumbled into a confused, surprised face. Outside them, his servant frantically paced, trying to intervene, reminding the girl that her father was currently attending to important state affairs. Lumak shudders from the revelation, his face pale, sweat streaming down it. The realization that the young girl's father was a demon lord struck him with pure shock and left him momentarily speechless. Meanwhile, the young girl noticed nothing of his shock and joy, cheerfully offering her favorite to the healer. She exclaimed with genuine delight that the bad spots that once troubled the creature had completely disappeared thanks to his efforts. The tiny fluffy buzzing of the little bee chirps joyfully. Now she is one body, flowing, bright and healthy. It seems she senses the change, cuddling and curling around her arm with new-found energy. Watching the pair, the ruler feels a wave of relief, seeing the creature coming to consciousness. The girl turns to him, smiling so brightly that her eyes shine, and eagerly credits the young man for this miracle. He approaches the healer and sincerely thanks him for the care shown to his daughter and her companion. The boy remains modest. He insists that the very fact of healing such a unique creature was a reward for him and also gave him knowledge that is invaluable. The ruler is genuinely surprised. Even the most famous specialists could not succeed where this young man did. To this, the healer explains his biography, telling that he previously managed a specialized clinic in the capital, thus having great experience in fighting various monsters. This statement forces the ruler to explain why such skills occur so rarely. In his state, monsters are almost never kept as companions, and only the elite or specialized farmers can afford them separate medical care. He realizes the boy's abilities go far beyond what he initially imagined. He looks intently at the boy and finally acknowledges the colossal talent standing before him. Now it is undeniable. This is not an ordinary healer, a master of his craft who has fully earned respect. He reflects on the boy's incredible talent and notes that Kiwi has done what the best healers from the demon realm could not achieve. He thinks, if the boy really were his spy, he would not have healed so selflessly. So the most logical step is to repay this kindness to ensure cooperation in the future. Standing with majestic authority, he solemnly and formally proclaims that Kiwi Alaya is now officially recognized as a refugee under the protection of the Aiguran territory. In response to the sincere words of thanks from the young girl, he acknowledges, although their races are different, they are now comrades on this land. After that, he allows them temporary residence in the guest chambers of the Demon King's castle, a gesture that carries an extremely high status. He continues to show hospitality. He orders them to speak up if any needs or concerns arise during their stay. The girl, while they are being escorted away, tremulously and restrainedly expresses gratitude. Later, when they were sitting in a more private place, he notices the hesitation of his elderly advisor and urges the old demon to speak frankly, freely, as he wishes, about the events of the day. The consultant voices his reservations, doubting the hasty decision to trust a human, especially considering the current shortage of demonic labor and how invaluable the Dark Healer is for their combat operations. He wonders whether such a valuable asset should be treated so leniently. His gaze sharpens, cold calculation flickers in his eyes as he listens to the advisor's doubts. He clarifies his position and explains, he never spoke about trust. He only acknowledged that the boy would be useful to the state. In his opinion, trusting a human and simply using him are two completely different things, so he intends to extract the maximum benefit from this utility. He continues with cold logic. As a ruler, he does not simply trust people. But he also does not intend to be so foolish as to discard a talented person due to lack of complete faith. He places benefit above sentiment. His advisor interrupts the conversation and notes that the boy had already established contact with Lady Amilta. Then he adds, there is no need to worry about the creature Myal because its appearance has a specific mission. Through the unique essence of the creature, it acts as a silent guardian. The advisor explains, if the dark healer held even a trace of malice, Myal, a creation of a trusted alchemist, would immediately sense it and instantly devour his heart. He averts his gaze from the elder and turns to the elegant woman standing nearby. The advisor watches, momentarily stunned by the sharp turn of the conversation and the ruler's decisive tone. He orders Esmeralda to find a suitable maid to care for Kiwi Alaya during his stay in the castle, leaving the final choice of candidate to her discretion. She politely bows, accepting the task with a quiet, confident smile. Looking over his possessions, he reflects. Intuition tells him that the boy is a storm destined to shake everything around. Esmeralda remains silent, her face unreadable as she processes the weight of his words and the possible chaos looming. Later, in the privacy of her own chambers, she contemplates the new wind her lord spoke of, hoping it will finally stir the stagnant, heavy air of the demonic realm. A knock at the door prompts her to ready herself to meet the guest with anticipation. The door opens and a young woman in striking dark attire appears. She declares that she has come to fulfill the duties of the boy's new familiar. Esmeralda approves the choice, how well the outfit suits her and the role she is already assuming. She stands before Esmeralda and asks whether the new role of caretaker conceals any goals or specific duties beyond ordinary service. She listens as the Lady Elder Demon commands her to become Kiwi Alaya's familiar starting this very night and orders, let the boy embrace her. At this hint, the young woman shudders, then aloud asks if she is expected to use her physical strength to crush the very life within him. She is then drawn into a tight embrace while Esmeralda clarifies the purpose, not violence but temptation and trap. She fully embraces her identity as a succubus. With every thoughtful glance at her power, she radiates confidence, envisioning how she will overwhelm Kiwi with pleasure. She vows to make him entirely hers body and soul, knowing no man can resist the allure of her form. She is released after the elder lady acknowledges the plan as a brilliant strategy to guarantee the boy's loyalty and prevent any thoughts of betrayal. Left alone in the silence of her chambers, she collapses onto the bed. The weight of her duties finally takes its toll. A weary sigh escapes her chest. She involuntarily contemplates the arrival of Kiwi Alaya, staring into the distance, and sees in it a fresh breath in their stagnant world, hoping that his talent will remain useful for their cause. She allows her thoughts to drown in the mounting pressures of her position. From the redistribution of demonic resources and the relentless reports of subordinates to the exhaustion of a long war and the need to tame restless nobles. She sinks to the floor, her impeccable composure finally crumbles under the weight of duties. Her sobs scatter through the room as she releases the accumulated irritation from administrative routine. She sits and still sobs, sighs about her loneliness, and dreams that someone would just hug her and give the support she so painfully craves. Her usual stoic face has vanished without a trace. Instead, an open, childlike, vulnerable sincerity emerges. Somewhere else, Lumek Agran stands in the center of a huge guest room and freezes, examining the boundless luxury of his new possessions. This room is much more spacious and comfortable than anything he had seen in the clinic. He shifts his gaze to a stack of research materials titled Interchangeability Between Monsters and Humans, and for a moment wonders if he really properly got rid of those drafts he left behind. The transition from healer to defector carries with it an annoying fear that some loose ends remain unresolved. Looking out the window at the unfamiliar landscape, he pondered the dark truth of his matter. Human life essentially a sacrifice of one's own life force. He proved, his mythical Greydark Dark Heal is equally effective against demons and monsters and against humans. He knows this level of magic is legendary, whispered about as a secret by only a few elite elves, and it is far stronger than any ordinary healing art. He is well aware that if he ever revealed such power to the people in the kingdom, he would be hunted down and torn apart by a mob like. Since he has already betrayed and left that life behind, those old fears no longer matter. For a moment he freezes in silence, staring at the horizon until suddenly he notices something unexpected. For a moment he imagines that selling this forbidden medical technology to the demon kingdom would bring him unprecedented wealth, but quickly dismisses the thought. Even a man in his position has a moral compass, so he decides. Some boundaries simply cannot be crossed. He stood alone, and calculations of the next step spun in his head. Not a single huge jackpot, instead he saw a scheme that would provide a steady, reliable stream of money. Reopening the clinic was the obvious option, but the questions of location, clients, and staff weighed on him like a heavy stone. He desperately needed a flash of inspiration, a truly grand idea. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a dull knock on the door. Without raising his voice, he calmly replied that they could enter. The door creaked quietly and opened, and a young lively woman entered the room with refined, confident grace. She introduced herself, smiled brightly like Mulfosha, and announced. From today, she was appointed the new familiar for Kiwi Alaya. Her appearance sharply cut into the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of his previous thoughts. In response, he politely, though somewhat reservedly, greeted her, acknowledged her arrival, and said he was glad to meet her. She stood before him, radiating a sense of duty and enthusiasm that seemed to fill the space between them. Her face changed slightly. A glimmer of something much deeper flashed in her eyes as she leaned closer. She assured him that she intended to give the most sincere and thorough care she was capable of. Her words fell heavily as if she truly took the new responsibilities with all seriousness. In the huge briefing room, the military leadership of the kingdom is gathering. An officer reports, despite all their efforts, neither the escaped demons nor the missing dark healer have been found. Standing before the senior officer, Lieutenant Colonel Yakov Shisen remains steadfast and declares that he will continue the search with even greater energy, while Brigadier General Jazan Solfege, a man with an authoritative bearing, thick beard, and fur cloak, listens to the report with weary finality. He sharply orders to cease the search to the surprise of the lieutenant colonel. The general explains, further pursuit wastes resources, so they must focus only on strengthening the perimeter around Eldon. Due to such a contemptuous attitude, Yakov rarely gives way, slams his hands on the table, and demands an explanation of whether they will simply release the prisoners. The general does not budge. He insists that the Dark Healer and his demon assistants have undoubtedly already crossed the border into the Demon Kingdom, leaving no trace. At the request for explanations, the general slowly slides the thick folder across the polished wood. Calmly, he says, the evidence for his decision is on these pages. When he begins to read, drops of sweat appear on Jacob's forehead, and his eyes widen at the terrifying names about the compatibility of monsters and humans and the dreadful potential of dark treatment from the class of myths. The general explains that these chilling recordings were found during a thorough investigation of the Kiwi clinic. He orders the lieutenant colonel to carefully study their content and watches as the younger man suddenly completely loses his composure. The terrible truth finally reaches him. The documents reveal a process where living people are used as victims to feed a dark treatment, a method that supposedly makes treatments classified as impossible myths a reality. He froze in stunned silence while the briefing continued. The officer explains, although the documents found in the clinic look like unfinished drafts, the theories inside rely on terrifyingly advanced logic, and this suggests a high reproducibility that contradicts their current understanding of medicine. The officer further notes a chilling coincidence. The theses seem to anticipate in advance the exact methods needed to treat demonic wounds, and this perfectly matches the recent unexplained prison escape. For the military, the scattered fragments of this puzzle finally come together into a clear, though cruel, picture of calculated betrayal. Brigadier General leans forward. His voice is muffled by a revelation that shatters the subordinate's world. He declares, Kiwi Alaya was never a victim dragged by enemies. No, the guy himself was the instigator of this whole story. The lieutenant colonel is overwhelmed by realization as if by a physical blow. His face contorts with horror and disbelief as he understands he was just a pawn in a child's game. Choked by the weight of his own defeat, he barely finds words in response, clenching his teeth in shame. He saw this investigation as a step toward promotion, a chance to snatch glory from the demon's secrets, but instead ends up branded as a national disgrace. He lowers his head and, stammering, blurts out an apology for complete lack of foresight. The general did not move upon seeing this repentance and issued a cold, new directive. Due to the chaos caused by Dark Healer, he is transferred to Linear Communications as a liaison officer, a bridge between the frontline forces in Eldon and the Central Intelligence Department, effectively stripping him of his position and influence. His fist clenches until his fingers turn white as the reality of the new position finally sinks in. Being a public courier is a role for the greenest recruits, a transparent humiliation that strips him of influence. The path to the rank of colonel, which seemed so close, vanished, and instead only the mundane task remains, transporting documents. Despite the bitterness of the demotion, he accepts the order with empty confirmation, swearing to return to the roots and unconditionally fulfill his duties. The general notes that the High Command seeks to press the advantage and launch a new offensive before the escaped demon executors can regroup. He tasks him with gathering every scrap of information from Eldon Gears. But as soon as the orders are finally sealed, doubt trembles once more in the darkness. A quiet voice questions the chosen tactic, whether such a measured stance is not too passive for the threat they now face. The nobleman narrowed his ice-cold realization descended upon him. If he truly wanted a result, he would have to construct the battlefield himself and ensure victory before the first strike sounded. He focused again on the woman before him. He saw how she ran her tongue over her lips, predatory and refined. He couldn't help but wonder if this gesture was a peculiarity of her demonic lineage. While they walked down the quiet corridor, she spoke with passionate devotion, solemnly declared that she was a faithful servant of Alaya and offered her services in any capacity that might be needed. She noted that Alaya was already gaining a reputation and eagerly wanted to prove her worth. Suddenly, she closed the distance between them and pressed her whole body against him with bold intimacy, whispering that she wanted to express deep gratitude in a more physical way, and he was briefly stunned by how straightforwardly she acted. Very close her features were striking, the skin to the touch was amazingly human, and the warmth of her body was no different from his own. Most of all, the eyes were remembered. In them stretched a deep, blood-red gradient, as if it was spiraling outward, hiding unknown depths. His head grew increasingly dizzy from her. He felt a strange, sweet aroma, like tropical fruits, rising in waves from her sidia reverberation of that unique magic she possessed. The mystery of her true nature weighed more heavily on his mind. Noticing his keen gaze, she smiled playfully and asked if he had set his eye on something specific in her. He awkwardly and dryly apologized for staring like that, but she waved it off as if to say, such curiosity is quite natural for a man, and added that she wanted Alaya to understand every facet of her nature. When she offered to explain the secrets of the race, a surge of anticipation rose in him, but her face changed slightly, hinting that this knowledge might come with caveats. She smiles gently and explains that since it is still evening, it might be a little too early for her to fully reveal what she is really like tanned. He absorbs this information and concludes that her race is one whose physical properties are influenced by the time of day. Accepting this, he decides to patiently wait for the right moment. Next to her, a young boy watches as she hums a cheerful melody to herself. He tilts his head curious, because he sees a sudden change in mood and does not know what exactly she is thinking right now. She suggests revealing her secrets immediately if his curiosity is truly so impatient, but he refuses and says that it is enough for him to simply wait until darkness falls, adding that his own imagination is sufficient. Just by observing her, he receives so much intellectual nourishment that it is enough to satisfy his curiosity. These words make her flinch from genuine shock. Her face contorts, and she repeats his phrase again, mixing disbelief and outraged, sharp intensity. In the air, a sharp, sudden energy seems to crack. Lesh perceives his joke in a completely different, much more candid sense. He remains seated, stunned, watching her explosive reaction. She states that his way of thinking seems quite unhealthy, and in response, he can only mutter something confusedly and questioningly, not even suspecting that they have misunderstood each other. He continues to explain, if direct observation is not enough, there are other ways to release one's thoughts, for example, through the hands. She blushes sharply, her heart pounds wildly as she continues to misinterpret his words. And he calmly recalls the time when he spent hours recording everything to pour out his creative frustrations. He admits, once he exhausted himself so much that due to endless movement, he developed a painful inflammatory injury in his wrist. It feels like an icy wave covers her, everything flips in her head, and she cannot comprehend how much energy he tried to unleash to bring himself to such physical damage. He continues his sharp explanation, eyes wide open, as if a manic focus pulses within him. He admits, once thoughts shift and flow, they cannot be stopped. They spiral into an endless loop that completely engulfs him. He does not let go of his tension, in turn, shifts the conversation to her duties and emphasizes that it is still only evening. She firmly states that she wants to serve her young master Alaya and insists that she must be allowed to fulfill her role. She stands opposite him with a playful yet confident pose, gesturing to herself and asking if there is any benefit at all from her current appearance for him. The dark, tight-fitting clothes sharply contrast with the soft light in the room. As long as she remains the center of his attention, suddenly he is struck by realization. He begins to guess that her physical changes are caused not by the passage of time, as he previously thought, but by a biological reaction specifically to light. He remains detached, cold, and analytical, while she shifts attention to the young Alaya, teasing, as if his admiration is visible to the naked eye no matter how much he tries to hide it. Passing by her provocation, he only allowed wonders if by any chance he brought a stethoscope with him. She stands before him, her figure radiating a strange energy as she points to the glowing trail on her belly with a sly pride in her eyes. He freezes in place and looks back, eyes wide open. There is both cold clinical interest and suddenly caught understanding. He exclaims in amazement and finally completes the puzzle. She really is a succubus. She giggles, confirming her nature, and swears complete loyalty to him as her master. With an inviting gesture, she lets him understand that he can do with her whatever he wants. He pushes his glass away with a sharp click, and a hard focus appears on his face, a professional determination as he prepares for what comes next. Instead of the expected intimacy, he leads her to the bed, sits her down, and declares that they will start with a formal medical survey. The succubus blinks in complete confusion. Her playful manner disappears, replaced by an empty, bewildered gaze until the situation suddenly changes. He leans closer, his gaze fully fixed on the glowing sigil on her skin, sharply demanding to know why he woke up right now if he had been motionless before, pressing her with questions about the specific conditions that trigger such a biological reaction. Continuing the interrogation, he demands confirmation of her kind, whether they truly feed on the life force of human men. She can only nod, bewildered by his cold medical approach to her very existence. Then she asks how her variant heals in the demon realm where humans are rare. She explains, ordinary food suits them, but the need for human energy is not so much physical hunger as a deep psychological thirst born in the mind. She sits stunned by the sharp change in tone, while the healer treats her biological needs as a common defect like tobacco or strong drinks. He stands over her, tapping her chin thoughtfully, completely unmoved by the tension in the room. Because of his cold detachment, her eyes open wide in disbelief. Throughout her life, her natural attractiveness has never so irreversibly failed. He only calmly explains. His interest is purely academic, fueled by the desire to understand her species as a whole. For a moment, he leans back with a confident smile and asks if she still has a composer to continue the medical interview. She can only stare back, her usual confidence trembling under his clinical gaze. In response, she leans in very close. Her voice is a low warning. Soon he will feel the grounded, disgusting desires overwhelming him. He shudders. The sudden closeness finally breaks his impassive mask. When she moves, his thoughts rush back to ancient texts he studied. They mention nectar produced by succubi. He notes, this substance supposedly tears the mind from a person and the victim falls into a senseless trance. Seeing his reaction, she looms over him with a predatory, graceful gait and inquisitively asks why his face changed so sharply. She makes her intentions clear, a hunger to consume the very essence of his feelings. The vision makes his face contort not from lust, but from manic scientific fervor. He roars with irritation and excitement, overwhelmed by the realization that such rare and precious biological data are laid out so openly before him. While he frantically records his observations, she watches intently with an expression of complete incomprehension. Her attempt to seduce has completely failed. He concludes with an exclamation. The flickering of the succubus's comb is a direct physiological response to arousal, and she considers it completely indifferent to what is happening. He continues clinical observations, comparing her physiological reactions to the addictive dependence on tobacco or alcohol. Coldly, with detached curiosity, he notices. As soon as a human male is nearby, her self-control seems to evaporate, a biological compulsion that she apparently cannot overcome. His eyes spiral into a mad obsessive gleam as he delves deeper into his investigation. Aloud pondering whether the comb-like glow depends solely on external stimuli or will manifest during solitary action sand, trying to outline the boundaries of its very nature. Despite her attempts to calm him and restore some semblance of order, he does not back down. He presses on, desperately trying to determine if a biological reaction occurs even in the complete absence of a partner, his scientific hunger outweighing any sense of social decency. Leaning forward with an intensity bordering on a predatory attack, he demands an immediate answer. She shudders, her face flushing with embarrassment and genuine fear, and she stammers, denying that the glow occurs under such circumstances. The young researcher plunges into a dark, scholarly ecstasy. His silhouette is twisted by the power of his own curiosity. He gazes enchantedly into the mysteries of the demonic body, realizing that simple arousal may not be the only impetus for its physical changes, and finds himself caught by the fact that the complexity of its race is truly incredibly fascinating. When she tries to slip away and escape through the bed, he looms over her with a terrifyingly playful expression. He questions her about the escape attempt. His voice flows with icy concentration that makes her body tremble and prevents her from breaking free from his cold, clinical gaze. He starts pacing back and forth, breathing heavily and unevenly, while his brain races through a labyrinth of new hypotheses. He wonders how reactions change with different partners, whether genuine feelings can shift the biological outcome compared to mere physical closeness, and his obsession spirals into a frantic fever. She looks at him, frozen by the thought that the very nectar she used drove his desire into a state of uncontrollable frenzy, though not as she had intended. Exhausted by his own mental strain, he finally stops, and his gaze clings to her as he asks a simple yet all the more piercing question about her age. He is finally pushed beyond the limit not by his own exhaustion, but by the succubus's desperate plea to rest. With one last irritated scream, she pushes him to the bed, and the body worn out by maniacal intellectual pursuit simply gives in. He falls flat on his back, and consciousness fades even before he hits the mattress. The next morning, his eyelids barely open under the soft light in the room. Nearby, a voice sounds both relief and caution in it, asking if he has finally returned to the waking world. Rises slowly. The young researcher shakes the sleep from his eyes and nods sleepily, hoarsely greeting his partner. She sits on the edge of the bed and looks at him intently, her face much more composed than her confused state from the previous night. Suddenly, she falls to the floor in a restrained, deeply apologetic bow, her forehead almost touching the ground. She begs for his forgiveness and explains that she had no choice. After his interrogations, which became unbearable for her, she had to resort to the sleep of magic. He only freezes, stunned and confused, not understanding how her behavior changed so abruptly. To atone for her guilt, she brings a heavy, lavishly decorated volume titled Specialized Medicine and Physical Structures, A Life History of Succubi. Knowing his insatiable thirst for knowledge, she offers it as a peace offering, and his eyes immediately ignite with a familiar scientific hunger. He accepts the gift with sincere gratitude. The fatigue that pressed just a moment ago recedes before such a rare find. But her face remains focused as she tells him there is one more important thing they need to discuss in the morning. When he reflects on her words, his thoughts turn to his precarious position in this foreign land. He understands that he has no official status and no record of service in the Demon Kingdom, so he must find a way to prove his worth through his specialized skills at any cost. Turning the new book with renewed enthusiasm, he encourages her to speak openly, stating that he is ready to take on any task. He understands, if he wants to build a future here, he must act persistently and seek every opportunity himself to strengthen his reputation. He freezes and his attention is caught by a sudden movement. A hand reaches for the heavy curtains. Mylofsh's voice becomes stern and he commands, from this day on he must not take a single step beyond the limits of this room. When she pulls back the fabric and shows what is happening outside, the reason for her warning becomes eerily clear. The Demon King's castle is now overrun by a huge horde of zombies. Lumek Agron, his face twisted with disbelief, demands confirmation of the reports. It seems the news of a massive outbreak of the zombie epidemic has struck him to the core. Shocked, Malfotia moves to the window, calmly insists that the reports are true and urges him to see everything with his own eyes. With a sharp rustle, she draws back the heavy curtains and reveals what is hidden behind the glass. Outside, the horror is undeniable, a horde of trembling creatures crawling. Half-decayed figures wander the territory aimlessly, and their moans scatter through the air. Looking from a completely different perspective, Kiwi Alaya stares at the disgusting spectacle. He doubts whether these are really zombies, feeling that there is something fundamentally wrong with their existence. He steps back to the table, touches his chin with his hand, and lost in thought analyzes the anomaly. He reasons, since they are in the Demon Kingdom, any undead should ultimately be of demonic origin, but these are unquestionably human corpses. Seeing his confusion, Malfotia explains what kind of undead are present here. She says that zombies can appear from magical stagnation, but they very rarely come to life and become mobile. As soon as she finishes the explanation, the young healer asks for a deeper understanding of natural phenomena and magical stagnation. She readily agrees to enlighten him on these secret ideas. He listens attentively as Malfotia explains. Magical stagnation, often called mazas, is essentially a type of spiritual impurity. Even among the demon race, this can manifest. After all, they are born from the very essence of their magic. She continues and notes, stress is the primary cause, especially against the backdrop of ongoing conflicts in the West and South, through which negative energy flows in waves. And in neglected areas where magic does not circulate properly, it pulls and folds this into a dangerous miasma. This idea seems terrifying to him. He compares it to mold growth and asks why these beings would take human form. Malfotia explains that they simply sprout from stagnation just as mushrooms appear from rotten matter. She adjusts her glasses and thinks, although the exact mechanism is unknown, zombies seem to adapt their form to the environment. Now they are near the Demon King castle, so they have taken a humanoid appearance typical for local demons. He watches the creatures through the window and notes, although forest-dwelling zombies are usually quadrupedal, these are truly humanoid. He contemplates their biology. Do they have even a rudimentary brain to direct movements? Or are they just self-replicating empty shells? A sudden, boldly ambitious thought strikes his head. If his dark heel can patch that specific brain defect that drives them to attack the living, he can create a whole army of mindless, obedient workers. He perceives this not as horror, but as a huge business opportunity despite the silent concerns of his companions. She cuts off his thoughts with a stern warning. It does not matter that they are interested in zombie biology, they must unconditionally stay in the room. And she emphasizes, these creatures do not have great strength, but they have neither fear nor pain. Because of this, they become unpredictable and dangerous. He brushes off her concerns with a casual response, saying he understands the risks. She offers help in case anything else is needed and leaves, leaving him alone with dark calculations. Malfotia grips him. She leans closer with a piercing gaze, pleadingly demands that he never goes out alone. Her care is painfully tangible, almost suffocating when she insists, let him promise to stay safe. He can only give a weak, frightened answer, confused, because her sudden zeal throws him off balance. She recoils and he freezes, pondering the absurdity of her request. Does she really think he would so easily take a risk? He weighs the nature of zombies and understands, unlike her, they have neither speech nor mind. Conducting a medical interview with a soulless corpse that no longer fits in his head. With such creatures, connection simply cannot be established. Seeing his hesitation, she softens her expression a little. A gentle smile barely appears on her lips as she admits that her concern might have been excessive. She politely apologizes for behaving too authoritatively, and the tension between them finally begins to ease. When all questions are settled, she prepares to leave and says she will return around noon with food. He watches her leave, briefly thanks and warns to be more careful while she walks down the corridor and the door clicks shut behind her. Now he stands alone by the door, and a sharp gleam of determination flashes in his eyes. He pulls himself together, whispers a quiet word on the verge of breaking, preparing to put his plan into action despite the warnings he just heard. In a moment he rushes straight through the dark corridors, and his footsteps echo dully on the cold stone. He thinks, talking to the undead is impossible, but one-sided observation, a clinical examination from afar, he can definitely manage that. A dark, ambitious smile spreads across his face as he contemplates the potential profit. He almost smells gold in the air and his thoughts race wildly. How to use this uprising to his advantage, and his laughter echoes through the empty hall. But his confidence does not last long. As soon as he gets on his feet, he starts running for his life from the moaning mass of the very creatures he intended to study. Cold sweat appears on his forehead. He realizes that everything is going much less smoothly than he had dreamed. A fierce pack pursues him immediately as soon as he stepped outside, and that was definitely not in the plan. He manages to hide for a moment in the closet, but curiosity does not relent. Pressing against the crack and peering at the mass outside that groans from movement, he mockingly asks if their habit of crowding together signifies some kind of social structure. In responsiently mindless hunger, realizing the futility of his interview, he abruptly disappears sliding down a makeshift rope made of fitted titanium linens. He lands firmly on the cobblestones below and immediately, without looking away, surveys the nearby surroundings in search of the road ahead. He does not suspect that nearby a young girl is fleeing in panic, clutching her little white companion to her chest. She tries with all her might not to be heard. Her voice trembles as she calls Kiwi, weaving through the treacherous streets teeming with monsters. She shudders when the man below suddenly calls out to her, noticed how boldly and precariously she settled on the small wooden structure. He asks why she is climbing into such danger, and through tears she points to the ground, warning that a threat lurked right below. He quickly joins her on the roof. His face is stern as he sharply scolds her for disappearing from sight. He emphasizes, her actions are pure madness and this is where there are plenty of living dead. He listens as she completely falls apart. Her face is wet with tears, she stammers and utters explanations in fragments. She only wanted to go for a short walk, but the sudden appearance of these creatures blocked her way, caught her off guard, and did not let her return to the safety of her room. She continues to sob while he lowers his gaze to assess the situation, calmly asking how many threats they currently face. She sniffs and points out that only one creature blocks their path, then he tells her not to move until he figures it out. He watches as a lonely, smoldering figure staggers right towards them, jerky, unnatural movements. The girl continues to scream in fear, and he is already preparing to face that creature, his voice steady as he acknowledges what is happening. He laughs triumphantly as the creature collapses before him, mocking the monster for falling into his trap. For him, this is not just a victory, a rare chance that fell into his lap. Pressing the mad zombie to the ground, he hears a frightened voice calling about Kiwi's safety. He reassures the girl, says there is no problem, and asks her to wait a moment while he tries to neutralize the threat forever. Instead of a quick kill, he decides to satisfy his curiosity, so he intends to browse the creature's brain with his magic. He notices, although it is decayed, its skeleton and muscular structure are still amazingly similar to that of a living human. His fascination grows as magical sensations reveal intricate details inside. The spinal cord and nervous system are perfectly preserved, and the reproductive organs remain as well. It seems to him as if he is playing with the very clay of a Goda masterpiece of biological engineering. A dark realization overwhelms him as he runs through the possibilities of this discovery in his mind. If he can control the electrical signals sent to the brain, he will be able to make the creature perform any action and possibly establish mass production of dumb, simple workers for his own purposes. This morbid experiment is suddenly interrupted by the appearance of Malfosha. She descends from the sky, spreading her wings. In confusion, she exclaims, stunned that Kiwi and Amilta are here in such a dangerous place. She demands an explanation of what they could be doing here. Liumak loomed over the boy and demanded an answer as to whether he had been attacked. Kiwi, still lying on the ground and silently reeling from shock, could only give a confused response at mention of zombies, and the danger they had to flee from hung in the air like a heavy stone. Suddenly, the demon harpy swoops down with a furious scream. Her wings spread wide as she prepares to strike. She orders them to retreat immediately to end the threat with a single blow. She quickly changes her tone, but as soon as Lumax stares at her with a stern look, she begins to stammer and barely utters a weak excuse. He looks at her with a raised eyebrow obviously. He does not believe that a second after the attack she switched to clumsy excuses. Turning back into the safe shelter of the building, Malfosha's patience ran out. She scolds them. Her voice cuts through the air with frustration as she reminds them that she clearly warned about the dangers outside and ordered them to stay in the room. He tries to justify their actions, but she immediately interrupts, asking how they could have possibly returned looking like exhausted vagabonds after such a reckless and unauthorized outing. Despite her anger at that man, she turns to the harpy with a gentle expression and sincerely thanks her for finding them. Halyuan accepts the praise with a note of pride and discomfort, while the boy behind just hangs hunched, utterly exhausted. So the demon's curiosity quickly gets the better of her, and she directly asks why Malfosha even gets involved with someone like the guy. Suspicion rings in her voice, dripping from every word. This lack of respect provokes sharp condemnation in Ulfosia. She insists that the girl should have addressed their guest properly. Harpy reminds that the boy is not just a guest, but a savior who deserves their most sincere gratitude and respect. She continues the explanation, insisting that even before coming here, she managed to deepen her friendship with the Demon Kingdom, and asks if they disagree, her tone light but firm as she stands confidently before them. Through her composure, Halyuan's suspicion only grows stronger. Mulfosia notes, the king gave Halyuan and her companions leave, yet they still hold on to their duties. And she also says that she has no fatigue at all because of the constant dark souls that Kiwi keeps giving her all day long. This revelation drives her into a furious rage. She accuses the woman of being a succubus who seeks to suck all the life force out of Kiwi. Mulfosia does not flinch at all. She calmly corrects her and says that she was officially appointed as the familiar of the young master, and she takes this role with all seriousness. When the tension rises, a brief metaphorical thought flashes in the air: the fox devours the chicken, emphasizing how predatory the situation seems. Lumac dismisses it dryly, saying the comparison is too crude, and in such a scenario, most likely Kiwi will be the one completely plucked. Despite the interruptions, her anxiety does not lessen. She insists, Mulfosia is a danger to Kiwi and demands her immediate replacement, as she has seen and gotten used to many times. Mulfosia only watches her face unreadable but calm. Noticing her anxiety, he sharply intervenes from his place. Lumac values Halyuan's concern, but assures that he has a natural resistance to such temptations and almost never feels the call of strong desires himself. The focus shifts to the mystery of his existence. Despite being human and having the status of a saint, Kiwi possesses a level of magical power that defies logic. It seems he is content with a temporary castle, and perhaps finds more joy in his research and simple accumulation of wealth than in grand plans for the world. Even when she is taken away, Halyuan continues to protest. She insists that Mulfosia's reputation as a high-ranking succubus makes her presence inherently dangerous regardless of how much she claims to be only a familiar. She continues to protest fiercely, but Mulfosia calmly challenges her. If she truly believes that sweetness does not work, let her step forward and see the result with her own eyes. This advice makes her choke with disbelief, especially when the succubus mocks her supposed innocence. She is overwhelmed with shame because the hint that she is too naive to grasp the art of seduction hurts deeply, and she angrily insists that she is capable of it. Despite her bravado, she still clearly trembles. Her face flushes, and she asks for advice on how to even begin. Her companion just shrugs and gives her full freedom to do whatever she wants with the young man. The harpy is confused by this sudden consent. Her eyes wide open, uncertainty cuts the silence as she checks if such a thing is really allowed. She is told that as long as the result brings her pleasure, there are no objections to her actions. Taking a cautious step forward, she approaches the boy who is sitting. Her wings quietly rustle as she prepares for her move, and her gaze tightens into the target of her anger. Meanwhile, he seems completely unaware of her intentions. Suddenly, a sharp cry of pain bursts from her lips as a feather is torn from her wings harshly and without warning. She shudders in shock, demanding an explanation of what he just did, and he calmly lifts the prey and says it was a fluffy, molted feather rand. It would have fallen out anyway. He ignores her indignation and instead shifts clinical attention to the sample in his hand, noting its amazing softness and wondering if the texture owes to accumulated magical energy, and this discovery truly piques his interest. Angry at his lack of tact, she shouts that he has absolutely not a drop of delicacy. Meanwhile, Mulfosia watches the quarrel with a knowing smile, and the thought spins in her head. This direct, analytical style is simply the essence of who Kiwi Alaya is. She stands by the door and listens as Mulfosia delivers the final warning, cautioning that her irritation should not lead to another rash outburst. Halyuan, still burning from that first clash, mutters reluctant agreement and promises to keep away from such decisive methods in the future. Turning away attention from the harp, Mulfosia sincerely apologizes to the young lord and explains. Halyuan's blunt honesty is actually a sign that she has already begun to open up to him. While two familiars settle a quarrel, Lumet's Agran strolls down the corridor with the medical officer and notices. The boy and the high-ranking demon seem to find a strange common ground. Later, while Lumax quietly sits at the table and immerses himself in a book, he suddenly breaks the silence. His voice strikes so sharply that the people nearby involuntarily flinch from surprise. He looms over Mulfosia with a dark, commanding presence, demanding an explanation for her unauthorized walk and forcing her to falter, desperately begging for a promise that such a mistake will never happen again. Trying to relieve tension, she convulsively glides her gaze over what is outside the window and incessantly babbles about how a rare zombie variation could look to distract from her previous mistake. When the wild energy subsides, it lets out a weary sigh and realizes, although it was just an acquaintance for only one day, it already seems to have deeply understood the strange nature of the boy. Then she firmly declares that she will stay by his side until the current unrest subsides, even when Lumax skeptically points to her obvious futility in the crisis. She remains sitting like that, On her face is a mixture of irritation and duty because she is reminded again, her safety is above all for the kingdom. Nearby, Kiwi lets out a tired sigh as if he doesn't care about the protective measures ongoing while the surrounding area is being cleared of the threat from the undead. Far from the quiet halls of the palace, in a deserted, rock-chopped landscape, dark energy seethes. From the depths of a huge cave, some presence begins to rise and the winds of fate noticeably change, for what has long slumbered is awakening. A skeletal figure in tattered robes throws its head back and laughs with an empty laugh. He proclaims that his creation zombies, which he spawned by his own power, have finally made contact with the living world, and this marks the beginning of his long-awaited return. Among its ranks stand out specialized horrors, the restrained zombie soldier, the cunning zombie thief, and the majestic yet still terrifying zombie queen. Each of them is a testament to its dark dominion over the dead. Abilities and forms far surpassing the ordinary trembling corpse. Standing before the assembled lieutenants in the grand, ruined hall, the skeletal lord prepares to announce a decree of extraordinary importance. The air thickens with tension as his subjects await the word. Their loyalty is bound by necromantic magic that keeps them alive. He orders them to infiltrate the Demon King's castle under the cover of night and capture the people inside. His order is unconditional. They must be returned alive. Death would ruin his plans for their future transformation into his newest servants. Leech's jaw clatters with sinister laughter as he contemplates the future. He is pleased by the very thought of carving out new servants from the living again. The empty ribcage flares with dark, twisted joy, and he savors the chaos about to spill forth. The Bone Lord sits on his dark throne, empty eyes flashing with ominous light as he addresses the court. He notes the arrival of a living soul and disdainfully says, as long as she has the power of the Holy Throne, she poses no threat to his dominion. Next to him, the undead queen listens attentively as he orders his subjects to rejoice. He proclaims that their ranks will soon expand. Soon, even more of their former human relatives will join the legions of the dead. In the center of the chamber, a vortex of dark energy swirlswabs strike one after another, testifying to the growth of their power. With cold satisfaction, he announces that the invasion from the demonic realm is proceeding exactly according to plan, pushing them one step closer to the complete subjugation of the world. Behind the dark corridors of the undead, two hands idly twirled in the air. A barely audible whisper of a voice repeated the word zombie again and again like a mantra lost in a creepy, overly medical curiosity. He lies on his back staring at the ceiling, aloud pondering how to mass-produce runny noses to have an endless supply of organs for transplantation. His companion, Malfotia, sighs in frustration, reproaches him for his obsession, and says he probably only sees corpses even in his dreams. She stands over him, and in her gaze is sincere concern and almost distrust, as she questions him whether it is his decision to stay overnight just to keep watch. He remains half-lying, and his thoughts still drift toward the scientific possibilities that such a situation might forcibly reveal. Seeing that she will not be convinced, she declares, she will lie down on the floor right in front of the door so he cannot slip away. And adds a sharp warning, they are on the third floor, so jumping out the window is a foolish escape attempt. Then her stern expression breaks into a light, mischievous smile, and she suggests another idea. If he really cares about her comfort, they can just sleep together, and you can immediately see how he flushes from the sudden change in tone. He looks up from the pillow, his face a mask of complete astonishment as the proposal hangs in the air. The young healer barely manages to grasp how mundane it sounds, his voice catching in his throat as he tries to form a response to the idea of sharing the best. Noticing his hesitation, she simply smiles, says she did not expect such an invitation but assures him she sleeps quietly and will cause no trouble. She exhales lightly, realizing his intentions are entirely innocent and he will make no attempts. Good peaceful night, and she settles in, preparing to spend the evening. Soon a heavy silence falls over them, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock as the hands crawl toward midnight. They lie side by side under the blankets. The initial tension fades, and the night deepens, plunging them into a heavy, ominous sleep of the exhausted. He suddenly twitches. Some strange sensation pulls him from a deep sleep. As his eyelids barely open, he feels several cold, intrusive hands pressing heavily on his body, and a low groan of confusion escapes his mouth, and immediately understands that something has gone very wrong. Above his bed looms a silent, armor-clad figure's empty gaze fixed on those in the room. The metallic gleam of the helmet catches the dim light, an icy harbinger of the invasion that shattered the night's peace without a sound. He suddenly tears upward, sweat streams down his forehead, and the reality of what happened crashes down on him. A piercing, sharp scream cuts through the cramped room, and he demands to know who dared to violate their refuge in the dead of night. Next to him, the invader had already grabbed his partner, pressing her to the floor with unbearable force. She screams in horror, her thoughts racing to find senseless explanations. Why a member of the undead appeared in their private quarters, and whether this was some strange, imposed role-playing game that he supposedly ordered himself. Their work is visible through the swaying curtains of the open window. The true architects of the ambush lie in wait in the darkness. The glass monarch and his terrifying queen watch everything coldly, without any emotion. Their appearance is a silent oath to the trap that finally clicked shut. He jumps out of the high window. His dark figure is silhouetted against the sky as he quickly disappears from the building. Inside, the muffled screams of Milafashi are cut off by a heavy hand as she realizes in horror. She is on the third floor, and the armored visitor looms threateningly at the edge of the window. In a moment, a huge armored demon tears down from the ledge, firmly clutching the girl captive as they swiftly fly toward the ground beside their skeletal lord. Next, the medical officer examines the remains of the attackers and notes, these are not ordinary undead. Their high efficiency suggests they were created from real human bodies, not naturally arisen. He continues the analysis, noticing that the muscle density is incomparable to standard zombies, so he concludes, the original host was a true formidable warrior. During a closer examination of the cranial cavity, he finds a concentrated mass of twisted magical energy pressed into a certain area of the brain. Turning his gaze back to the captured armored demon, he thoughtfully asks aloud whether this strange magical signature is the root of their coordinated and unstable behavior. Meanwhile, the undead queen raises her blade high into the sky. It begins to pulse with a bright, threatening light that floods the night. She stands silently while the medical officer examines her, noting, the light she emits is undoubtedly the holy night glow of zombies. He recalls how many times he has seen this very gleam during royal parades and realizes, her techniques are identical to the holy arts of the kingdom. He is tormented by the thought of what tragic sequence of events could have brought a holy being to such a state to a revenant. She grips the blade glowing with radiance. The group continues to retreat through stone corridors. The skeletal lord leads ahead with stern authority, and the armored demon carries the unconscious Malfosia. From the shadows, someone with a mysterious voice orders them to proceed cautiously, solemnly commanding to take the prisoner and not to cause any more harm to humans. Suddenly, the stone floor cuts the silence with a roar. Its section spins with a heavy thud and reveals a hidden stairwell descending into darkness. The group freezes at the threshold of this secret passage. They begin descending narrow, winding stairs, the path illuminated only by the faint glow of their own magic. Meanwhile, the medical officer stays behind, turning over in his mind who exactly could have been that voice he heard earlier, and wondering if someone in the Demon King's castle is acting against their master's will. The group reaches the bottom and continues their way through underground tunnels. Footsteps echo dully in the cramped, damp space. Turning back to the laboratory, the researcher finishes work on the remains of a high-performance zombie. He only notes the size. The recovery process is finally complete, although the sample turned out to be quite a hassle for analysis. Then he lifts the elongated core, a mass of distorted magical energy embedded in the creature's brain. And he concludes, this must be the very node through which unconditional control over the undead warrior was exercised. He reflects on how complex the task is. Neutralizing magical energy is like untying a knotted cord. Delicate work. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. Temporarily having tamed the creature's hunger, he moves on and notes that he does not yet wish to be swallowed. He stretches out his hand, touches the skeletal figures, and between them a wave of energy bursts with a crack, triggering the next stage of his research. When a young woman coughs, he offers a brief apology for how long it took to make the zombie safe, then calmly states that he intends to analyze her neural patterns further. The undead queen groans in pain, and he immediately decides to prioritize their immediate safety and proposes a tactical retreat from this area. He must come to terms with the inevitability of intervention given the order hanging over him from her master. He already resignedly accepts that now he will have to add her brain to his list of test subjects, and, for some reason, the prospect gives her a strange feeling of pride. He silently watches as a single tear traces a path down the queen's face. Her gaze is a chilling mask of pity, defiantly contradicting her lifeless nature. His analysis reveals a disturbing reality. The density of distorted magical clusters in these subjects far exceeds his previous data, and the resulting brain activity is completely alien. He stands next to Malfosia at the edge of a vast, unknown dungeon and watches strange magical oscillations running in waves through the air. Flashes of boiling and immediately instant freezing. This place is not marked on their maps, and he understands. To go deeper, they will need more time than they have now. Turning his attention back to the main problem, he listens as Malfosia asks if it is possible to influence the brains of zombies enough for them to become a protective force. He admits that even with his knowledge, it is impossible, as their neural pathways are too complex. No standard control methods can handle it. He lays out all the incredible impossibility of this task on the shelves. He says he can roughly stop the electrical signals in the brain, but the ability to generate precise, workable commands is a reserve of power for the most divine itself. At this stage, even creating simple robots from these inanimate remains is a task he no longer reaches. Folding his hands in a relieved sigh, he laments the loss of what he considers the most profitable business opportunity. A true taste of regret is heard in his voice as he secures his gear. The possibility of a new breakthrough slipped through his fingers, at least for now. Before moving on, he glances at the Queen of the Undead. Her face is bathed in tears. He stops, silently watching her grief, and aloud wonders if her sobbing is a sign of hidden rage that he has yet to understand. He squinted, feeling a sudden surge of magical energy strangely familiar. After a brief moment of silent reflection, his gaze shifted further and the full weight of the situation heavily settled on him. He questioned the futility of talking to a being that certainly could not understand him. The woman in the white dress urged him to act faster, warning that the master of those undead already approaching could appear at any moment, so their position was very unstable now. As they made their way through the winding, ribbed stone structures of the giant cave, she said that they had probably entered a dungeon. She clarified, such a place is a natural habitat for monsters. Previously, they were protected by a blessed moment still lingering in the air, but eventually the protection dissipated, leaving them defenseless. When a herd of hasty undead emerged from the shadows, he admitted he was unable to fight, so she stepped forward and confidently promised she would handle the threat. With a sharp, furious burst of speed, she rushed at the monster's movements, blending into a blur as she broke through their ranks with wild, ruthless efficiency. Standing among the ruins of her attackers, she turned, throwing a playful smile, and noted that she was not chosen as everyone knows for no good reason, while he watched, clearly impressed by her skill. She stands next to a young healer as he surveys the surroundings, noting that they are still on the upper levels of the dungeon and must break out of here quickly. He wonders how such a place can exist so close to the surface, and she finds nothing strange about it. Because of its ancient history on these lands, she explains, this territory has belonged to Demon King for centuries. She clarifies that in such a strategic location, a dangerous dungeon is never left unattended, and waving her hand, points to the silhouette of a distant castle looming on the horizon. Suddenly, both jerk their heads toward the disturbance in the air. The sensations sharpen until a sharp sound echoes through the cave. In response to the invasion of a twisted vortex of dark, malicious energy, darkness begins to thicken at the center of the path, swirling with threatening force. From the darkness of the depths of shadows rises a gigantic skeletal figure. Empty eyes flash with cold, ghostly light, and he adjusts his tattered cloak. An ancient creature declares that they have crossed the boundaries of the kingdom of the dead, a place where he has complete power over every soul. He relentlessly continues the grim proclamation, telling how he has ruled this underground kingdom since time immemorial and gathers the fallen to strengthen his eternal legion. Finally, the skeleton lord extends his bony hand to the boy and commands, cast off mortality and join his army that does not die. He is met by a furious roar. The zombie queen bursts forward, flooding the space with a fierce scream, and her eyes burn with protective rage. She warns, whoever dares to touch Alaya will be mercilessly slain. In response to her emotional outburst, the skeletal figure only chuckless voice grates, dry and merciless. He mocks her position under the protection of Demon King, delights in her cruel spirit, and allows himself a twisted dream of seeing such a woman submit. While he speaks, a pack of mindless undead rushes forward, pressing the queen to the ground despite her frantic contortions. Lick mocks her, calls her a pathetic succubus, and promises her decades of torment from her own servants before finally twisting her into a permanent puppet slave. Watching the spectacle of the Grims up close, the young healer remains calm, is already calculating their next move in his mind. While the queen shouts insults at her captor, he recalls her words about the reversal of holy power and realizes there are no options left, only his one desperate path. He decides to probe for a weakness through conversation, disguising his plan as intellectual curiosity. He questions the skeletal ruler about his theories on converting life force into physical power and asks whether the ultimate goal is to turn him into yet another mindless soldier for the undead army. This question caught Licha by surprise. His bright eyes twitched, and a new interest appeared in his gaze. He admits that he did not expect such skillful speech from the prisoner and asks if the boy has really already mastered the revolutionary technique to do what was previously considered impossible. The skeletal sovereign emits a hoarse laugh. It is clear that he enjoys the intellectual challenge. He says, people often mistakenly equate sacred power with life energy. This mistake, he claims, he has completely debunked in his research. Watching the creature display its pride, the boy realizes the face may simply be hungry for audience attention. He recognizes the universal need of scientists to boast about their discoveries just after spending whole years gathering forbidden knowledge. He stands before the skeletal monarch and asks what the essence of the three elite undead, whom the king is so eager to show, is. The boy's voice is even, almost dispassionate, as he inquires whether these best warriors were created by the same methods as the mindless horde. Pushing him away, the skeleton king spread his arms over the dark maw near the cave, calling his champions zombie soldier, zombie thief, and zombie queen. He commands, appear and show your power to the new audience. He freezes in confusion as the minutes drag on in heavy, awkward silence. The cave stubbornly remains empty. Looking at the display, the young healer realizes the dark treatment he applied earlier might have had an unintended side effect on the king's most powerful servants. His patience ran out. He bursts into the darkness with a scream, angrily demanding to be told why his calls are ignored. Finally, a figure emerges from the darkness, but it is not the loyal servant the king had counted on. The zombie queen steps into the light, her face twisted ridge tears everything apart like a mask. She lunges forward abruptly and does not say a word. Her movements are a continuous blurred onslaught, full of violent intentions, directed only at the former master. The king shudders from shock as the blow lands. His voice breaks with disbelief, and he demands an explanation for why his own creation dared to raise the blade against him. He twitches from betrayal while she relentlessly continues the unceasing onslaught. Her eyes burn with a predatory fire, and he clearly sees she's power over the dead is finally destroyed. He stands amid chaos, his bony figure trembling as control slips away. Nearby, researcher Elia wipes sweat from her brow and asks what happened with these strange events while simultaneously checking Amalfosha's safety. Below, a mindless zombie groans, its rotting hand reaching sideways with no purpose. Because of this sudden change on the battlefield, she sincerely thanks the man who saved her. He responds with a grim realization. He says he does not fully understand the mechanics, but it is clear that these undead warriors still retain a fragment of their former pride. These three champions, a soldier, a queen, and a thief, were once people who lived with dignity and iron will. And it seems their main essence was not truly killed by the necromancy that bound them. The human brain is a mysterious organ. Even when the body has long decayed, deeply rooted memories of humiliation and burning embers of rage can remain in the subconscious, waiting for a spark to ignite them again. Seeing how this internal rebellion created a curtain for the attack, he urges Amalfosha, seize the moment and flee while the sovereign is distracted. Behind their step, the skeletal master screams in agony and his own creations turn their blades against him. The former mighty ruler is now a victim of his own pride, broken and shattered by the very soldiers he considered mindless puppets. They strike with fury nurtured by a lifetime of suppressed grievances. Straightening up and standing firm, a trio of elite undead, the armored soldier, the majestic queen, and the cunning thief restores a semblance of lost humanity through this act of defiance. They are no longer mere tools, but vengeful spirits craving retribution. When they quietly disappear, Elia reflects on the nature of risk and how choice shapes a man. He explains to Amalfosha, in any situation, one must choose between strategic risk and high reward, or low risk and low reward. Here he chose the former, allowing the fallen king to continue enduring humiliation and defeat. He intends to keep him in this disgrace until the grand designs of the Demon Kingdom's conspiratorial game finally come to fruition, showing no mercy to the one who once imprisoned them. He watched with cold precision as a viscous substance suddenly splattered onto the facial image of the skeleton king, and the empty eyes of the lick widened in shock. Struggling with the sticky liquid, he jerked and desperately resisted, while the researcher calmly stood nearby, lamenting. Although he felt a kindred soul in Licha, the humanity that lingered in her ultimately became her downfall. When the ruler fell to his knees, he explained. It was a succubus nectarine, a treacherous and deadly effective lure that worked exactly at the moment the king recognized the true nature of Amalfosha. He continued his clinical disdain, pointing out that the king's sudden pause before tasting her revealed his hidden desires. Even as a creature of death, his human passion was so uncontrollable that a single succubus was enough to easily ensnare his feelings. When the monarch lay paralyzed and gripped by fear, she slowly stepped toward him across the cracked earth. Her bare feet made no sound. Amalfosha releases her hidden weapon, the sweet scent of a succubus, a seductive poisonous wave of fragrance. Her magical sweat, unique to her kind, immediately begins to cloud the senses of the mad corpse. She clings to the ledge. Her form flickers, enticing with a seductive magical aura, and the skeletal warrior has no defense against this sensory assault. While the skeleton king hopelessly stands enchanted, heart almost materializes in his empty eye sockets. An inevitable and brutal strike cuts through the air and with a cross slash hits the zombie queen. The momentum of the ambush drives us forward. His head is knocked off with a shovel clean off his shoulders. The skull pathetically rolls in the dust, and even in this state he gapes in despair, not for his own life, but because he can no longer see the beautiful, distracting trick. He continues to beg from the dust, demanding that the person turn their face to him, to the woman. His dignity is already completely shattered by the succubus's spells. Kiwi reaches down, his hand firmly rests on the skull as he examines this creature in a pitiful state. He states without any emotion, coldly and precisely, the brain structure of these undead is probably almost the same as humans, since they are so easily subdued by bodily desire. Quickly pulling on a simple dress, Amalfosha rushes up to him. Her voice trembles with concern as she asks if he is wounded. He calmly reassures her, thanks her for the successful distraction, and securing the loot hides it in a small pouch. Looking at the remains of the undead force, the realization settles clearly. This king had a harsh ability, the power to birth zombies directly from the same magical energy source and bind them to his simple commands. He watches the huge gathering of the undead, considering how their numbers could alleviate the shortage of labor in the demon state if put to work and turn a potential threat into a serious economic benefit. While he watches, Mulfosha advises the explorer, it is necessary to immediately leave the dungeon to avoid new complications. In response, a firm nod of agreement and a shared sense of urgency. They set off on a march through crooked stone tunnels, and behind them pursues a persistent, measured moan of zombies. Noticing the strange devotion of the undead, Mulfosha wonders, could they have become attached to the explorer? He ponders whether this is a remnant of the absolute power of the Skeleton King or perhaps something deeper. He extends his hand and firmly grabs the sleeve of one of those grotesque, shuffling figures and resolutely leads him to the surface. The zombie queen reacts with a series of painful groans. Her gaze is fixed on him with an intensity bordering on consciousness. Staring intently at her, he begins to suspect that these creatures are trying to convey something important despite his belief that they are merely soulless corpses, devoid of any will or desire. A faint, all-knowing smile slides across his lips as he acknowledges a rare miscalculation in his own calculations. He dismisses the thought of the impossible, that this word is merely a refuge for those who have ceased thinking. Looking directly at the undead queen, he declares, in the realm of research, every phenomenon has a logical explanation yet to be discovered, and he does not intend to leave her mystery unsolved. Turning away from the depths of the dungeon, he calls the dead and asks them to follow him, giving them a new purpose as the main subjects of his research. The zombie queen and her armored subordinate step a pace behind. While Mulfosha watches the strange procession, a mixture of curiosity and lingering anxiety in her. Meanwhile, in the great throne hall of the Demon King's castle, Lumek Agron sits in silence, deeply contemplative. He runs through in his mind the hidden depths of the dungeon they have just passed, places with secrets that even he as ruler has not yet fully uncovered. He addresses the researcher directly and sincerely thanks him for the successful mission and the acquired data. A rare display of humility, and the Lord of Demons apologizes for the unexpected dangers and deadly encounters the squad faced in the underground depths. The researcher bows slightly and waves off the apology. He explains that this experience yielded far more than any danger. It brought invaluable data and unique specimens sufficient for his work for years to come. Seeing this unwavering dedication to science, the ruler asks if the man has any specific reward he desires. He immediately makes it clear. He is ready to grant a significant boon, recognizing that such exceptional service deserves appropriate recompense. A sharp, ambitious gleam flashes in the researcher's eyes as he prepares to voice his true demand. He has been waiting for this very moment to obtain the resources needed for his next great project. He puts forward his bold request to receive permission and support to establish a medical clinic on demon territory. He dreams of a place where he can continue his rigorous treatment and research, unbound by the limits of the human kingdom, bridging two worlds through medicine. Lumetz Agron enthusiastically approves the request, declaring it a wonderful idea that should be properly welcomed. Nearby, a young researcher freezes for a moment. He finds it hard to believe that permission to open the clinic was granted so easily. He bows low, showing deep gratitude for the Lord's benevolence. At that moment, Esmeralda shifts attention to the zombie who claimed to be the king of the dead and hints that they should figure out how best to use him. She accepts a rare apology from her lord. He laments that the lack of demon relatives forced her to work so late at night. She turns away with a barely noticeable pout, acknowledging the difficulty of the situation, and he promises to be more attentive to her need for rest. The researcher silently observes this quarrel and, without averting his gaze, slows his breathing, considering the terrible state of the demonic realm and the unbearable burdens its rulers must bear. They return to business. The sovereign shifts his gaze to a small wrapped box and decides, before moving forward, it is necessary to find out if this king of the dead is capable of reason. He orders the young man to restore the creature's consciousness. She warns the prisoner may flare up with violence as soon as he wakes, but her master remains indifferent. He confidently states, his care is highly valued, but there will be no problems he cannot handle. He begins to show his power. A glowing ball of energy flashes in his hand, crackling like a warning. He is ready to meet any display of hostility with devastating force and does not look away, whether the captive truly intends to resist. The ritual ends in seconds, but the result is not at all what they expected. Instead of a terrible monarch, a charred skull in a box raises its gaze with empty, pitiful eyes and quietly introduces itself as a thief forest thief. He lay charred on the floor. His skeletal figure was smoking, and he kept repeating his name to the ruler, confirming that it was indeed Pachelu. Lumaka leaned back, unimpressed by the nickname. He considered the name Pacha too cute for an undead creature and decided it needed to be changed. Despite his pitiful condition, at first, Lick tried to possess a giant zombie to seize the ruler hostage as soon as consciousness returned. A desperate attempt to gain power and it failed instantly. This uprising was crushed in less than a second. After that, the ruler turned to the young researcher and asked to come up with a more accurate and professional name for the new captain. He proposed the name Germ, explaining it as a term for a self-replicating pathogen, a title that more accurately reflected the nature of the creature as a biological anomaly. Amused by the idea itself, the ruler officially baptized the skull as Germ, a loyal servant of the kingdom. In response, a submissive dog-like bark burst from the lifeless head, as if it had accepted its new role. Then the researcher outlined a plan to use the creature for manual labor to replace the usual zombies. Although he hinted at a much larger strategic application, he preferred to prioritize first. He suggested that these undead could be turned into weapons for the defense of the demon kingdom, Eldon, a prospect of military innovation that stirred the sovereign's interest. He stands with outstretched arms, a bold smile on his face, and offers to sell his revolutionary idea for an astounding sum 120 million gold. He leaves the maid stunned by such a brazen demand. Her hands tremble slightly as she grips the kettle, uncertain whether he truly dared to address this request to the Demon King himself. He calmly assures her that the contract is already finalized and calls the huge sum a fair payment for the value he provides, while she remains fixated only on the sheer enormity of the wealth involved in this deal. His face changes to an expression of feverish, extremely passionate ambition as he outlines his plans. To spend the funds on hiring new medics, upgrading hospital facilities, and establishing a network of clinics across all kingdoms. Seeing his enthusiasm, she asks if he really loves his job, a dark healer. But he shocks her. He honestly admits that he has no feelings for the profession itself, leaving her completely surprised about his true motives. He bursts with wild energy and explains that money is just a tool to obtain a rare medical tax percentage and finance his research to push the boundaries of his abilities even further. She looks at him and understands. For him, knowledge is a self-sufficient goal. He confirms this with a gentle, quiet chuckle and simply says that he craves the very process of knowing. While stirring tea, he says, as long as his basic needs are met and he can continue studying without interruption, the specific nature of his role does not matter. Acquiring knowledge is his only true goal.